I stood there in my best suit, the one my late wife used to press before every Christmas dinner. The laughter from the dining room spilled into the hallway, warm and golden. But none of it was for me. My son's voice cut through the noise. "Dad, the table's full. Maybe sit by the kitchen island." The room went silent, forks paused midair, and for a moment, even the Christmas lights seemed to stop blinking. The chair that used to be mine was gone, replaced by strangers, by wealth, by pride. I built that house with my own hands, yet I was no longer welcome at its table. And as I sat alone, the smell of roast and laughter drifting from the next room, one thought carved itself deep into my chest. He took my seat tonight, but by tomorrow, he'll lose the whole damn house. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Snow drifted over the quiet Ohio neighborhood like a slow curtain, softening the edges of fences, driveways, and the world itself. Inside a small, weathered house at the end of Maple Drive, Walter Hayes stood on a creaking ladder, looping a strand of faded Christmas lights around the eaves. His breath came in small, deliberate clouds. Each bulb flickered with a faint orange glow, old-fashioned, like him. He hummed under his breath, a rough, half-forgotten tune his late wife used to love. Inside, the living room was a museum of memory. The tree stood crooked, as it always had, dressed in decades of mismatched ornaments. Some were chipped, others bore tiny inscriptions. Daniel, age 6, written in crayon on the back of a wooden reindeer. Walter ran his thumb along its edge, smiling to himself. "Still holding on, huh?" He whispered to the ornament, though he meant it for the house, maybe even for himself. He paused at the mantel, where a photograph of Evelyn caught the glint of the lights. Her smile seemed alive, even after all these winters. He straightened the frame carefully. "You'd have told me to replace those bulbs," he murmured, his voice half-laugh, half-ache. "But they've got a few good years left." The silence that followed was gentle, not empty, just waiting. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. Walter climbed down slowly, joints stiff, and picked up the receiver. "Dad?" came Daniel's voice, smooth, professional, like someone who learned to sound confident for a living. "Danny, Merry Christmas, son." Walter's face lit up. "Yeah, Merry Christmas, Dad." A pause. Paper rustled in the background, the sound of someone multitasking through affection. "Listen, Natalie and I talked. We want you to come to dinner this year, at our place." Walter blinked, surprised. "Your place? Well, that's wonderful." "Yeah, figured it's time we hosted. You've done enough of the old traditions." He didn't catch the undertone. Not yet. He only heard the invitation. "I'll bring something," Walter said, heartwarming. "Maybe my apple pie or—" "Don't worry about that, Dad," Daniel cut in. "Just come. We've got everything covered." The line ended with polite efficiency, leaving Walter staring at the receiver a moment too long. He hung it up slowly, that old smile still ghosting his lips. "Our boys hosting Christmas Eve," he said softly, glancing at his wife's photo. "First time." The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air. Margaret Price, his next-door neighbor and Evelyn's oldest friend, stepped in without knocking, as she always had. She brushed snow from her coat, eyeing the half-lit tree. "You still keeping those lights from the Reagan era, Walt?" He chuckled. "They've got character." "So do your knees," she muttered, helping herself to the armchair. "But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be replaced." Walter smiled, a man used to her sharp edges. "Daniel called, invited me to Christmas dinner." Margaret froze mid-motion. "At their place?" He nodded proudly. "Nice surprise, huh?" She frowned. "Walter, that boy's changed. Since he married that woman, he's been chasing everything but family. Don't expect warmth from cold hands." Walter sighed. "He's my son, Maggie. People say things about change, but blood's still blood. Blood's also what freezes first when it's left out in the cold." He chuckled at her dramatics, but something in her tone lingered. Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice. I saw Natalie at the store the other day. She looked through me like I was drywall. Don't go expecting a Hallmark moment, Walt. Protect that heart of yours. He nodded, though her warning slid off him like snow from a roof. I'll be fine. It's Christmas. When she left, the silence returned, heavier this time. Walter stood by the window, watching the flakes tumble against the dark. Across the street, a family's laughter carried faintly through the night, the kind of easy warmth he remembered from when Daniel was little. He turned off the living room light, leaving only the soft blink of the Christmas tree glowing against the window pane. The ornaments twinkled in reflection, ghosts of happier winters. Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping the house in a hush so complete it felt sacred. Walter pressed a hand to the cold glass. "See you at dinner, Evie," he whispered, his breath fogging the pain. Behind him, the old wooden clock ticked steadily, each sound echoing in the empty house. The light from the tree flickered once, then steadied, like a quiet warning unnoticed. And as the snow kept falling, blanketing everything in deceptive peace, Walter Hayes stood watching, unaware that this would be the last Christmas he'd ever walk into as a guest. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned gray and brittle, the kind of cold that seeped through every crack in the windows. Walter Hayes stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie, the same dark green one Evelyn had given him 20 years ago. The fabric was worn smooth from use, but he straightened it carefully, as though honoring her memory by wearing it right. On the dresser beside him sat a small wooden clock, polished to a soft glow. He'd carved it himself over the past month, a tradition he'd never missed since Daniel's childhood. Every Christmas, a clock, different in design, but always engraved with the same words on the back. Time keeps family honest. It was something Evelyn used to say whenever Daniel tested her patience as a boy. Walter ran a cloth over the clock's face one last time, checking the steady tick of its hands. It felt good, precise, clean, reliable. "You'd have liked this one, Evie," he murmured. "Simple, but it'll last." He placed it gently into a box lined with old newspaper, wrapped it in brown paper, and tied it with string. Before leaving, he polished his old wristwatch, the one he'd worn since his wedding day. The glass was scratched, but it still kept time perfectly. He smiled faintly. Guess we're both still ticking. By the time Walter pulled into Daniel's driveway, snow was falling again, thinner now, like ash from a dying fire. The house loomed at the end of the cul-de-sac, all sharp lines and glass, its edges clean and cold, the new kind of rich. He parked his truck carefully, taking a deep breath before stepping out, gift in hand. The front door opened before he could knock. Daniel stood there, crisp and polished, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than Walter's entire outfit. "Hey, Dad," he said, smiling, but his eyes didn't. Walter grinned, unbothered by the lack of warmth. "Merry Christmas, Danny." He held up the box. "Brought a little something." Natalie appeared behind Daniel, her perfume arriving before her voice. "Oh, Walter," she said smoothly. "You didn't need to bring anything. We have plenty of decor already." Her tone was sugar laid over ice. Walter just nodded, stepping inside. The air smelled like candles, vanilla and something sharp, but none of it felt like home. Every corner gleamed. Not a photo was crooked, not a pillow out of place. The house looked perfect, but it sounded empty. Then a voice broke through. "Grandpa!" Lily came running down the stairs, red scarf trailing behind her. She nearly slipped on the polished floor before throwing her arms around him. Walter's face softened instantly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that morning. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, hugging her tight. "You've grown half a foot since summer." "I missed you," she said into his coat. He smiled. "Missed you too, sweetheart." From behind them, Natalie's voice cut gently but firm. "Lily, careful with his jacket. It's snowing outside. You'll get water on the floor." Lily pulled away reluctantly. Walter's hand lingered on her shoulder before he let go. He turned back to Daniel. "You've got yourself a fine home, son. Real beautiful." Daniel nodded, glancing around like he needed to confirm it for himself. "Yeah, we've worked hard for it." Walter chuckled softly. "You sure did." He handed him the small box. "This is for you." Daniel looked down at it as though Walter had handed him a relic. "Another clock?" "Yep," Walter said simply. "It's tradition." Natalie's smile tightened. "Well, thank you, Walter. We'll find somewhere to put it." He caught the pause, the faint condescension wrapped in politeness. But he said nothing. Instead, he looked past them toward the dining room, where the table shimmered with crystal and silver, every piece perfectly aligned. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Want to see the tree, Grandpa? I helped decorate it." He smiled and followed her into the next room, leaving Daniel and Natalie exchanging quiet, unreadable looks behind him. The tree was tall and immaculate, every ornament identical, color-coded, a designer's tree, not a family's. Walter stared at it for a long moment. It was beautiful in the way a store display is beautiful, distant, untouched. Lily noticed his expression. "I told Mom we should put the old ornaments up too," she whispered, "but she said they didn't match." Walter nodded slowly. "Maybe next year, huh?" She smiled, but her eyes said she didn't believe it. From the dining room came Natalie's voice, calling them for dinner, sweet but commanding. Walter glanced back toward the hall, at the gleaming floors, the expensive lighting, the perfection that left no room for warmth. He exhaled quietly, setting the clock down on the mantel, where it looked oddly out of place among the glass and marble. The tick of its wooden gears sounded too human for the room, too alive. As he turned toward the dining room, that faint tick seemed to follow him, echoing softly against the sterile silence. Something in it felt off, not the rhythm, but what it was counting down to. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Long mahogany table, polished until it reflected the chandelier above like glass. The plates gleamed white against gold-rimmed chargers, and a centerpiece of roses and pine needles ran down the middle, perfectly symmetrical. Walter stood at the doorway for a moment, his old coat folded over his arm, taking it all in. It was beautiful, yes, but cold. A beauty that warmed, not welcomed. Natalie floated in first, her heels clicking like punctuation. "Everyone, we're ready," she called, her tone bright and rehearsed. Laughter and chatter followed as guests, mostly faces Walter didn't recognize, filtered in. A few nodded politely when they saw him, unsure whether to greet the old man or assume he was part of the staff. Daniel appeared beside him, hands in pockets, scanning the table. Walter smiled faintly. "Well, you've outdone yourself, son. Looks like a full house." Daniel chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, actually, about that." Walter's eyes followed his son's gaze across the table. Every chair was filled, every name card carefully placed. He didn't see his own. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. Dad, the table's full. I didn't realize Natalie invited her parents, and her brother brought his girlfriend, so..." His voice trailed off, weak. "Maybe you could sit by the kitchen island. It's just right over there, closer to the food anyway." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of background conversation dulled, the laughter dimmed, and only the faint clinking of silverware remained. Walter looked at his son, not angry, not yet, just confused. "The kitchen?" Daniel smiled, trying to make it sound like nothing. "Yeah, you know, more casual. It'll be easier for you to get up if you need anything." Walter's hand tightened slightly around the back of his coat. He looked at the long table, polished faces, expensive watches, perfect smiles, not a single seat for him. From the far end, Lily suddenly piped up, her voice cutting through the silence. "He can sit by me." She was already scooting her chair, making space. Natalie's head turned sharply. "Lily, honey, that seat's taken, remember? Remember?
built, I realized
Mrs. Fairchild sitting
it
there.
wasn't just about the
But
work, it was about the
that's
people
enough,
we helped
Natalie
along
said,
the way.
her smile never fading, but her tone slicing clean. Lily froze, eyes darting to her father for help. Daniel looked down, avoiding everyone's gaze. Walter swallowed hard. His throat felt tight, but he managed a small nod. "It's fine, sweetheart," he said softly. "Grandpa's good right here." He walked slowly toward the kitchen island, a wide marble counter gleaming under pendant lights, and pulled out one of the bar stools. It was too high, too cold, but he sat anyway. From there, he could see everyone, hear them, but he wasn't part of them. Natalie clinked her glass, signaling the start of dinner. "Let's dig in," she announced, the forced brightness of her voice sealing the moment as though nothing unusual had happened. Plates passed, wine poured, laughter rose and fell in practiced rhythm. Walter kept his eyes on his food, a perfectly roasted plate that somehow tasted like nothing. He tried not to notice how Daniel laughed at jokes that weren't funny, or how Natalie leaned in when people complimented her cooking. Lily kept glancing toward him, her small face drawn tight with worry. When he finally looked up, she mouthed, "I'm sorry." Walter smiled faintly, shaking his head as if to say, "Don't be." He took another bite, though the food felt heavy in his mouth. The sounds of laughter, of cutlery against porcelain, filled the air, but none of it reached him. He looked down at his plate again, then at his old hands resting beside it. They were hands that had built a home, raised a boy, buried a wife. And now, they sat idle beside a stranger's marble counter. A burst of laughter erupted from the table. Someone had told a joke about family dynamics, and Daniel was laughing the loudest. Walter forced a smile that no one saw. He stared at the glass of water before him, watching the chandelier's reflection ripple across it. Behind him, the clock he'd made ticked faintly from the living room. The sound was soft, steady, a heartbeat against the noise. Walter's eyes glistened, but he blinked the tears back before they could fall. Pride had always been his armor, and tonight it was the only thing keeping him upright. As the laughter carried on without him, he folded his napkin carefully on his plate, looked toward his son's glowing table, and whispered under his breath, to himself, or maybe to Evelyn, "Guess I found my place after all." The hum of the room went on, oblivious. But somewhere in that silence between heartbeats, something inside Walter shifted, quietly, irrevocably. The clinking of glasses echoed through the room like tiny bells, announcing something sacred. The dinner had reached that point where the wine had softened voices and loosened smiles. Walter sat still at the kitchen island, his fork idle on his plate, watching the golden light from the chandelier stretch across the polished table. It was a tableau of modern success, his son's success, framed perfectly for admiration. Daniel stood at the head of the table, his hand raised, glass in hand. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice calm, rehearsed. "Before dessert, I want to say a few words." The laughter quieted. Even the children leaned back, curious. Natalie placed her manicured hand on his arm as if giving permission. Daniel smiled, that polished kind of smile he'd learned in boardrooms. "To family," he began, "to hard work, to growth, and to new beginnings." Walter's gaze flicked up at those words, new beginnings, but he said nothing. He'd heard that tone before, the one Daniel used when he wanted to sound humble but needed to show off. Daniel went on, his glass tilting in the soft light. "This year's been big for us. Natalie's firm expanded, I got the promotion. And, well, we finally made some smart financial decisions." Natalie beamed. "Long overdue," she murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. Walter half smiled, assuming this was the usual self-congratulation ritual. But then Daniel's tone shifted, lighter but colder, including letting go of the old family property. "We finally decided to sell Dad's old house. It was a tough call, but it made sense. Big house, high taxes, just sitting there empty most of the time. It's the smart move." The words dropped into the room like glass breaking. Walter's smile faltered. For a second, he wasn't sure he'd heard right. The clock's faint ticking from the other room filled the silence in his ears. Someone chuckled awkwardly at the table, mistaking the tension for hesitation. "Ah, sentimental places are hard to part with," one of Daniel's colleagues offered. But Walter wasn't moving. He blinked, trying to make sense of the words. You sold the house? His voice came out soft, cracked by disbelief. Daniel's expression didn't waver. We're in the process, yeah. The market's high. You always told me to think ahead. Walter's throat tightened. But it's still my house, he said, almost to himself. The deed, Daniel cut him off gently, with the kind of smile reserved for a child asking the wrong question. Technically, Dad, you signed the transfer last year, remember? I said it was just for estate planning, to make things easier when the time came. The air thickened. Forks froze midway to mouths. No one met Walter's eyes. He remembered signing something. He remembered Daniel standing beside him at the bank, saying it was temporary, just a paper shuffle to save on taxes. He remembered trusting him. Walter's voice was quiet, brittle. You said it was for protection, for me. Daniel exhaled, shifting his weight. It is. Look, Dad, the house was getting old. It needs work, maintenance, insurance. You can't take that on alone anymore. We'll get you something smaller, cozier. It's just a smart decision. You'll thank me later. Across the table, Natalie lifted her glass. 2 smart decisions, she said lightly. A few guests laughed politely, relieved to follow her lead. Crystal chimed. Walter didn't move. His reflection stared back at him in the silverware, a man out of place at his own son's table, stripped of the one thing he built with his own hands. The world around him blurred into sound. Laughter, forks clinking, the hum of polite conversation trying to fill the hole in the air. Lily's voice came faintly from down the table. Dad, what about Grandpa's things? Daniel shot her a look, too sharp for a party. We'll sort it out later, Lily. Walter set his fork down carefully, the metal clicking softly against porcelain. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. He pushed his chair back, slow, controlled, and stood. His eyes found Daniel's, steady, not angry yet, just hollow. You sold it, he said again, more to the air than to anyone. You sold your mother's house. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence did. Walter's gaze traveled over the table. Strangers eating from china he didn't recognize. His granddaughter looking down, ashamed. His son lifting his glass again to toast to progress. He felt something in his chest. Not a snap, but a slow, internal shift. The kind of pain that hardens instead of breaks. He nodded once, almost politely, and sat back down. Around him, the dinner carried on, laughter forced but present, as though nothing had happened. But Walter wasn't hearing any of it anymore. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. He didn't drink. He just stared at the reflection of the chandelier inside it, bright, fractured, and cold. When Daniel's voice rose again to offer another joke, Walter quietly placed his napkin beside his untouched plate. The chair creaked faintly as he leaned back. The clock ticked once more from the next room. A reminder that time, like trust, once given away, never truly returns. The night air cut sharp against Walter's cheeks as he stepped out of Daniel's house. Snow fell in steady silence, blanketing the street in white. The sound of laughter still echoed faintly behind the front door, muffled now. The warm noise of a world he no longer belonged to. He clutched the small wooden clock against his chest, still wrapped in brown paper. He had meant to leave it on their mantel, part of a tradition unbroken for 40 years. But after that toast, after hearing his own son brag about selling his house like a line item on a spreadsheet, Walter couldn't bring himself to let go of it. The cold bit through his thin gloves. Each breath came out in clouds, mingling with the snow that stung his face. His boots crunched rhythmically against the pavement, steady, unhurried, like a man walking through the wreckage of his own life. He didn't rush, he didn't curse, he just walked. Streetlights glowed dim and yellow, throwing long shadows across the snowbanks. The silence pressed around him, broken only by that sound. The slow, heavy crunch of steps that grew quieter as the neighborhood thinned. In his mind, The memories began to move, uninvited but
we
unstoppable.
helped along the way.
He could see the house again, the one now listed for sale, as it had been 50 years ago. Nothing but a patch of dirt and promise. He saw himself younger, shirt sleeves rolled, hands rough with calluses. Evelyn standing nearby with a thermos of coffee, her scarf blowing in the wind. "Don't make it too big," she had teased. "We're not raising a royal family." He'd laughed then, hammer in hand. A man should build wide enough for dreams to fit. Together they'd laid the foundation, room by room, the nursery for Daniel, the porch where they'd shared coffee every morning, the kitchen Evelyn had painted 3 times because the yellow never looked quite right. Every inch of that home carried her touch, her scent, her laughter. Now it was a line in a real estate portfolio. He stopped under a streetlight, exhaling slowly. The snow gathered on his shoulders like dust on an old book. His heart felt hollow, but something inside it began to stir. Not sadness anymore, not even disbelief. It was colder, sharper, something like resolve finding its footing. When he reached his street, the world was still. His house, or what used to be his house, sat at the corner, the porch dark. The old oak tree in the yard leaned the same way it always had, crooked from the storm of '97. He smiled faintly at it, then at the window where Evelyn's curtains still hung. The key turned in the lock with a familiar click. Inside, the air was colder than he remembered. The lights flickered on, dim, yellow, warm in a way Daniel's house had never been. Walter set the wrapped clock down on the table. It looked small and out of place against the emptiness. He took off his coat and sat in his old chair, staring into the quiet. The tick of the wall clock filled the room, slow and patient. For the first time that night, he let the truth fully sink in. Daniel hadn't just made a financial move. He'd betrayed him, used his trust as a tool. Those documents last year, the signatures, the reassurances about planning ahead. They weren't mistakes. They were part of a design. Walter stood, walking toward the fireplace. On the mantel, Evelyn's photo caught the light. Her eyes, calm and kind, met his. "He planned it, Evie," he whispered. "All of it." His breath fogged the glass. He walked to the front door to lock it for the night, and that's when he saw it. Something poking out of the mailbox, fluttering in the cold breeze. A flyer. He stepped outside and pulled it free, the paper stiff from the chill. At first, he thought it was just another local ad, but then his eyes landed on the photo. His living room, his furniture, his wife's curtains. The listing headline read, "Charming family home, move-in ready." The edges of the paper crumpled in his hands. His breath came out shallow, visible in the night air. The snow around his boots was turning gray from melted tears he didn't even realize had fallen. The realization hit clean and brutal. Daniel hadn't just sold him out. He'd prepared it long before that dinner. The transfer, the party, the toast, all steps in a quiet erasure. Walter looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly in the dark. A lifetime of work, of love, reduced to an asset his son could flip. He folded the flyer carefully, slipping it into his coat pocket. The wooden clock still sat on the table behind him, waiting, a symbol of time, patience, endurance. Walter looked toward the sky, snowflakes landing in his silver hair. His voice came out low, steady, carried away by the cold wind. "Not yet, Daniel," he said. "Not yet." The snow kept falling, thicker now, burying his footprints as soon as he made them, as if the world itself was already trying to cover what had just begun. The next morning crept in gray and brittle, the kind of cold that made even sunlight look exhausted. Walter hadn't slept. The for sale flyer sat on the kitchen table beside his half-drunk coffee, its edges curling from the damp of his palms. He'd stared at it through most of the night, reading and rereading the printed words until they blurred into nothing. The knock on the door came just after 8. 3 sharp taps, familiar, impatient. "Walt, you in there?" Margaret Price didn't wait for an answer. She pushed the door open, letting in a gust of wind and a swirl of snowflakes that landed on the old rug. She had her coat half unbuttoned, her hair tucked under a wool hat. Her expression was the mix of concern and irritation that only someone who's known you for 50 years can manage. I heard, she said simply, closing the door behind her. Walter didn't turn from the window. Small town, he said. News travels fast. Margaret took off her gloves, tossing them onto the counter. Lily came by this morning, said you left the dinner early. He gave a dry chuckle. You could say that. She eyed the flyer on the table, her face tightening. He really did it, didn't he? Walter turned finally, his eyes hollow but focused. Looks like it. He slid open a drawer and pulled out a folder, thick with creased documents. He laid them out slowly, careful as though handling fragile glass. These are what he had me sign. Said it was for estate planning, just a safety measure. Margaret leaned over the table, scanning the papers. Her finger traced the bolded legal phrases. Transfer of ownership, limited warranty deed, tax exemption. Her voice hardened. Walt, this isn't estate planning. This is a full transfer. You signed the house over. Walter nodded once, quiet. I trusted him. I didn't read it all. I just signed. She looked up at him, disbelief and anger mingling in her eyes. He used you. The words hung there, heavier than either of them expected. Walter sat back down, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He said it was just on paper, that it would protect me from probate, from taxes when I'm gone. He laughed bitterly. Guess he couldn't wait that long. Margaret crossed her arms, pacing slowly. I told you, that boy's got his mother's looks and his uncle's greed. Don't, Walter said softly, not angry, just tired. She stopped pacing, watching him. What are you going to do? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled one of the papers closer, tracing his own signature. The ink looked foreign, like someone else's hand. I don't even remember signing this one, he murmured. Margaret leaned down beside him, reading closer. He notarized it himself. Probably had a friend at the bank witness it. You'd never question it. The quiet in the room stretched until Walter finally spoke. Maybe there's a mistake. Maybe it's not official yet. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You really believe that? He didn't. But hope, even foolish hope, was easier to hold than what waited underneath it. She followed him to the old desktop computer in the corner, the one he barely used except for email and solitaire. The machine whirred to life, slow and complaining. Walter typed into the property registry search bar, his fingers trembling slightly. It took less than a minute for the truth to appear in plain text. Current owner, Daniel Hayes. Walter stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the glass. His jaw clenched once, his eyes unmoving. Margaret exhaled through her nose. Well, there it is. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just reached out and closed the laptop. The sound of it shutting echoed like a door slamming on 40 years of trust. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the old furnace. Margaret studied his face, calm, too calm. Finally, she said, you built this place from nothing, brick by brick, beam by beam, and now he's stolen it with a pen. Walter looked up at her, something sharpening behind his eyes. A builder knows every nail in what he's made, he said quietly, and every way to take it apart. Margaret gave a small knowing nod. Builders always know how to rebuild. Walter's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. The confusion was gone now. So was disbelief. What replaced them was focus, the slow, deliberate kind. He gathered the papers back into the folder, straightening each page before sliding it shut. Then he set it neatly on the table, next to the cooling mug of coffee. Rebuild, he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the word. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then reached for her coat. Whatever you're planning, Walt, don't let anger build the foundation. It never holds. He didn't answer. He just stared at the folder, eyes distant, voice steady. No, he said. but revenge does. When the door closed behind her, Walter sat alone again, the sound of the wind outside whispering against the walls he built himself. He opened the folder once more, fingertips resting on the signature, Daniels, bold and arrogant. The clock on the mantel ticked louder now, almost rhythmic. Walter's gaze lifted toward it, and a faint, dangerous calm settled over him. The wheels had started turning. The fire in the hearth burned low, throwing restless shadows against the walls Walter had built half a century ago. He sat alone in his worn leather chair, a stack of papers spread across the coffee table before him, the same papers that had taken his home away. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, each second sounding like a question he was finally ready to answer. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling in the cold. Outside, snow fell again, heavy now, clinging to the windows like frostbitten lace. It was Christmas Eve, but the warmth that should have filled the night had long since been hollowed out. Walter adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, reading line after line of legal text he barely understood. The jargon was dense, meant to confuse, meant to hide. But he was a builder, not a lawyer, not an academic, but a man who'd spent his life understanding how things fit together. And right now, that instinct guided him better than any degree ever could. He traced one line with his finger, then another. His breath slowed. Transfer of ownership, he whispered to himself, subject to reversion upon violation. His brow furrowed. He leaned closer. There it was, a paragraph so small it could have been missed by anyone not desperate enough to read every inch of fine print. In the event the transferee violates the residency condition or attempts transfer, lease, or collateralization of said property without the written consent of the grantor, the title shall revert to the original owner within 30 days of violation. He stared at it, eyes narrowing. Then slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. For the first time in days, the air around him felt alive. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath, the kind that sounded like relief dressed as realization. The document trembled slightly in his hands as he set it back on the table. His son, in all his ambition, had outsmarted himself. He played businessman with a builder. And in his arrogance, Daniel had left a foundation crack right where Walter would find it. Walter reached for his notebook, a simple spiral-bound pad he used for grocery lists and carpentry sketches. He flipped to a blank page, the paper catching the faint glow of the fire. Slowly, he began to write. Not a letter, not a confession, but a plan. He jotted down the clause, word for word, then underlined the phrase, without written consent. He thinks he owns it, Walter said quietly, almost conversationally, as if speaking to Evelyn across the room. But the boy never read the whole thing, never checked the nails under the paint. He wrote Daniel's name in the margin, then drew a thin line through it. Beneath it, in careful block letters, he wrote his own. A spark cracked in the fireplace. Walter didn't flinch. You wanted a business deal, son, he murmured, the words steady, deliberate. You'll get one. The flames reflected in his eyes now, not the warmth of family, but the light of calculation. It wasn't rage that moved him anymore. Rage was sloppy. This was colder, cleaner, the kind of focus a craftsman has when he knows he's about to rebuild something from the ruins. He reached over to the side table and pulled open the drawer. Inside were old bills, folded blueprints, and a small envelope containing the deed copies Daniel had left behind. Walter placed the envelope neatly beside his notepad. Reversion clause, he said again, the phrase tasting sharp in his mouth. You signed away more than you thought, Danny. He set the pen down and stared at the fire. The embers pulsed like a heartbeat, orange fading into crimson, crimson fading into ash. Each flicker of flame mirrored something shifting inside him. Not grief, not even betrayal anymore, but purpose. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows. Through the glass, the Christmas lights across the street blinked in slow rhythm, reflecting faintly in Walter's eyes. They looked almost alive in that glow. cold, precise, unyielding. He stood, stretching his back, and walked toward the mantel. Evelyn's picture sat there, framed in wood he'd carved decades ago. He touched the edge of the frame gently. "I should have seen it coming," he whispered, "but I see it now." The flames crackled again, louder this time, as though answering him. He looked down at the folder one last time, then at the notes he'd made, clear, simple, methodical. A plan forming out of betrayal. Outside, the snow kept falling, coating the yard in quiet white. From the living room window, the faint reflection of Christmas lights blinked back at him, scattered in the glass like distant stars. Walter's jaw tightened. "Merry Christmas, Daniel," he said softly. Then he turned away from the window, from the fire, from hesitation itself. In that moment, Walter Hayes stopped being the man who'd lost his home and became the man who was going to take it back. The morning came wrapped in frost and silence. Sunlight crept cautiously across Daniel Hayes' manicured lawn, touching every sharp edge of the world he'd built. Glass, steel, status. Inside, the house was still, save for the faint hum of the central heating and the occasional creak of settling wood. Daniel stirred awake, squinting against the brightness filtering through the expensive curtains. For a moment, the night before drifted back in fragments. Laughter, wine, the toast, his father's face at the far end of the room. He pushed it away with a sigh and swung his legs off the bed. Natalie was still asleep beside him, her hair spilling across the pillow like an ad in a luxury catalog. He glanced at her, then at his phone on the nightstand. Dozens of new messages. Work, investors, congratulations. A normal morning for a man on the rise. He stood, stretched, and headed for the window. But the sight waiting outside made him pause. Parked crookedly in the driveway, its paint faded, and its bed dusted with snow, sat Walter's old truck. Daniel frowned. The thing looked prehistoric next to his polished SUV. He grabbed his robe and stepped outside, the cold biting his bare feet instantly. The air was sharp and quiet, too quiet for Christmas morning. The truck door was closed, but something fluttered against the front door of the house, a single sheet of paper pinned beneath a small nail. Daniel tugged it free and unfolded it. In his father's handwriting, steady and deliberate, were 9 words. "Don't worry, I won't trouble you again. Dad." Daniel stared at it for a long moment, then exhaled through a half laugh. "Drama," he muttered. He crumpled the note in his hand and glanced at the truck again. Empty. No sign of his father. Natalie appeared at the door behind him, tightening her robe. "What's going on?" "He must have come by early," Daniel said casually, brushing snow off his hair. "Left me a guilt letter." Her brows furrowed. "You think he's okay?" Daniel shrugged. "He's fine. He'll get over it. Dad's always been sentimental. He'll cool down." She hesitated, glancing at the old truck again. "It's just strange. Everything he does is strange," Daniel replied, already stepping back inside. "Come on, coffee's getting cold." By the time the garage door rolled open and closed again, the note lay half buried in snow, its ink bleeding into the white like an unanswered question. Across town, the courthouse sat quiet under a pale winter sun. Walter stood on the front steps, bundled in his old coat, a folder tucked under his arm. He looked calm, too calm, like a man stepping into familiar work. Beside him, Margaret Price stood, clutching her purse and a thermos of coffee. "You sure about this?" she asked, peering at him through the cold. Walter nodded once. "I built my life on plans, Maggie. Every good plan starts with knowing the ground you're standing on." She gave a small, approving grunt. "You're not taking revenge, you know. You're taking back what's yours." He looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "That's what I keep telling myself." They entered the building together, the warmth inside a shock against their skin. The clerk behind the counter, a young woman with a practiced smile, looked up as they approached. "Good morning," Walter said, polite and steady. "I'd like to request access to property transfer records for parcel 287C. The woman typed into her computer. Name on the title? Hayes, Walter replied. Daniel Hayes. Her fingers paused mid-keystroke, eyes flicking up to his. He caught the hesitation, the look people gave when they recognized a quiet family mess, but were trained not to ask. After a few clicks, she turned the monitor slightly. Here it is. Property was transferred last year. Do you need certified copies? Yes, Walter said simply. Every page. The printer hummed, spitting out sheet after sheet. He collected them carefully, smoothing the edges. Each page felt heavier than it should have, as though the paper itself carried the weight of betrayal. Margaret leaned in. So, what now, lawyer up? Walter shook his head. No lawyers yet. Not until I know how deep the rot goes. She studied him. You're quieter than I expected. Noise doesn't fix a foundation, he said, tucking the papers into his folder. You start by finding the cracks. They stepped back out into the cold. The courthouse bell rang faintly in the distance, a thin, metallic sound that seemed to echo across the empty square. Margaret zipped up her coat. You really think there's a way out of this? Walter gazed at the horizon, at the town he built cabinets and fences and lives in for decades. There's always a way, he said softly. You just have to remember where you put the blueprints. She smiled at that, small but real. Then let's start digging. They walked down the courthouse steps together, their footprints marking a clear path through the snow, two parallel lines heading towards something inevitable. Walter didn't look back once. The sun hung low, pale against the frozen sky, and though the town was quiet, there was something alive in that silence now. A hum beneath the cold, the sound of a man beginning again. The bell over the glass door jingled as Walter stepped into Hartwell Realty, brushing snow from his shoulders. The warmth inside hit him immediately, the artificial kind, heavy with the scent of cinnamon air freshener and printer toner. He removed his hat, scanning the room. Modern decor, cheerful colors, and walls lined with glossy posters of smiling couples holding new house keys. One of those posters, pinned dead center on the far wall, stopped him cold. It was his house. The image was crisp and professional, the living room spotless, his old furniture replaced with staging props. The caption read, "Charming family home. Modern comfort meets classic craftsmanship." Walter's jaw tightened, but his expression stayed neutral. He adjusted his scarf and approached the front desk, where a young receptionist looked up with practiced brightness. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" He smiled kindly. "Name's Walter. I was wondering about the house you've got listed on Maple Drive. Number 42. The receptionist brightened. "Ah, yes. That one's a gem. Newly updated, great neighborhood, excellent schools." She paused, squinting. "Are you looking to buy?" Walter hesitated just long enough to sell the lie. "Thinking about it. Maybe for my daughter and her kids. I built a few homes around town in my day. Thought I'd see this one up close." "Of course," she said, eager to help. "Let me see who's handling that property." She scanned her monitor. That would be Karen Lyle. One moment. A woman appeared from a side office, mid-40s, neat blazer, professional smile. "Hi there," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Karen. You're interested in the Maple Drive listing?" Walter shook her hand firmly. "Yes, ma'am. That house has history. Caught my eye." Karen led him into her office, where the same photo of his home hung framed behind her desk. Walter sat down, steadying his voice. "So, it's on the market, huh? Looks like a well-built place." Karen chuckled. "It's one of the better ones we've listed this winter. Solid bones. The seller's son handled the paperwork. Daniel Hayes." Walter gave a polite nod, masking the flicker behind his eyes. "That's so. Yes, seems like a nice man. Said the property was part of his family estate. We've already had several showings, actually." He leaned forward slightly. "Any serious buyers?" Karen smiled, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Off the record, we've already accepted a deposit. The offer's pending inspection." Walter's heart sank for just a moment before something steadier took its place. "Well," he said softly,
everything we
That's
built,
good
I
news for your
realized
office.
It wasn't just
Karen
about the
nodded.
work. It was about
We
the
should
people
close within
we
a few
helped
weeks.
along the way.
You'd be surprised how fast good homes go these days. Walter pretended to study the framed listing photo. You mind if I take a look at the sale file? Just curious about what kind of offer it fetched. I built a lot of homes back in the day. Can't help comparing craftsmanship to value. Karen hesitated. I really shouldn't. Those are confidential documents. Walter offered a warm, harmless smile, the kind that made people underestimate him. I understand. I'm actually the original owner, so I know the property inside and out. Just curious to see how the paperwork reflects the condition. Professional interest, you might say. The word original owner seemed to soften her stance. She studied him a moment, then exhaled. All right, I'll show you a copy. Just don't tell anyone I did. She pulled a thin folder from her desk drawer, sliding it across to him. Inside were the documents: purchase agreement, title details, bank receipts. Walter's eyes moved with calm precision, cataloging every page. He recognized Daniel's signature again, bold, practiced, careless, right beside the realtor's seal. He nodded, feigning polite interest. Very thorough work, he murmured, while discreetly pulling his phone from his coat pocket. As Karen stepped away to answer a phone call, he clicked the camera button 3 times under the desk. Quiet, steady, deliberate. When she returned, he had already closed the folder. Appreciate the look, ma'am. It's a fine home. You'll find a good buyer soon. Karen smiled. If your daughter's serious, tell her to call me. These listings don't last. Walter stood, tipping his hat. Oh, I don't think it'll last, he said softly. But I'll be sure to pass that along. Outside, the winter air hit him like clarity. He walked back to his truck, his breath white against the cold, the faint sound of Christmas music playing from a store down the street. He sat behind the wheel, pulling up the photos he'd just taken, each one perfect, evidence of Daniel's arrogance, proof of the sale he had no right to make. Walter smiled faintly, eyes cold and focused. That's the thing about building something with your hands, he muttered. You always know where the weak spots are. The truck engine rumbled to life, low and steady. Snow drifted across the windshield, but through it, his eyes burned clear, the look of a man who just found his blueprint for revenge. The old clock struck 9, its rhythmic chime echoing softly through the quiet house. Walter sat at his workbench in the garage, the faint scent of sawdust and varnish filling the air. The single bulb above him cast a yellow pool of light over scattered tools, sandpaper, and a half-carved wooden box. The rest of the house was dark, just how he liked it now. Outside, the snow had slowed to a whisper. The town was asleep, blanketed in winter silence. He ran the fine grit of the sandpaper over the edge of the wood, slow and deliberate. The sound, a steady rasp, soothed him, each stroke filing away the roughness, leaving something smoother beneath. He didn't notice the shadow by the window at first, a flicker of movement, then a soft knock. Walter turned, squinting. The door creaked open, and a small, shivering figure slipped inside, closing it quickly behind her. Lily? She looked up, cheeks pink from the cold, a wool hat crooked on her head. I didn't wake you, did I? Walter's surprise softened into concern. No, sweetheart. What are you doing out this late? Does your father know? She shook her head quickly. He and Mom were arguing again. I waited until they stopped talking. I wanted to see you. Her voice cracked slightly, and something inside Walter cracked with it. He gestured to the stool beside him. Come here then. Let's get you warm. She climbed up, her boots dripping little puddles on the floor. Walter poured hot water from a kettle into 2 chipped mugs, stirring cocoa powder into each. Don't tell me you walked all the way here. Only halfway, she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. Mr. Bradley's porch light helped. I ran the rest. He smiled faintly. Brave girl. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the space heater filling the air. Lily looked around the workshop, the shelves lined with jars of nails, the old radio, the smell of wood. It was nothing like her house. Her house smelled like lemon polish and tension. This smelled like home. Finally, she broke the silence. Grandpa, Are you mad at Dad? Walter set his mug down carefully. Mad? He thought about the question, the weight of it.
When I look back at
No,
everything we
he
built,
said at
I
last,
realized
his tone calm,
it wasn't
almost
just about
deliberate.
the work. It was
I'm
about
patient.
the people we helped
She frowned.
along the way.
But he sold your house. Mom said you'll have to move. Walter's eyes softened as he looked at her. Your dad made choices he thought were smart. Sometimes smart isn't the same as right.
It wasn't just about the
He reached
work.
across
It
the
was
table,
about the people
pulling a
we
thin
helped
strip of
along
wood
the
toward
way.
them. You see this piece? Feel it. Lily ran her fingers along the edge. It was rough. It scratches. Exactly, Walter said. He handed her a piece of sandpaper. Now rub it, not too hard, steady. She followed his rhythm, slow, circular motions. The sound filled the room again, gentle, almost meditative. What's this for? She asked. It's a lesson, he said. Wood's like people. You can't fix it by forcing it. You take your time. Keep pressure steady even when you're tired. If you rush, you ruin the grain. After a minute, he brushed his thumb over the smooth edge. See? Not perfect yet, but getting there. That's patience. That's control. Lily smiled a little, pride lighting her face. You could teach that to Dad. Walter chuckled softly. No, some lessons can't be taught at the dinner table. Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain. Then where do you teach them? He looked down at the wood, at his own hands, lined, scarred, steady. Here, he said quietly, in the quiet, in what you build. Lily nodded, and for the first time since she'd come in, she looked peaceful. When it was time for her to leave, Walter walked her to the back door. The snow had stopped completely now, the world outside, still and silver. She turned at the step. You won't tell them I came, right? He smiled. Your secret's safe, but next time, call first. You know how I worry. I promise. She hugged him tight before running off into the night, her boots crunching softly against the frozen ground until she disappeared down the street. Walter stood at the doorway for a long while after she left, her small figure fading into the distance. He glanced back at the workbench, where the sanded piece of wood sat smooth and unbroken. The cocoa steam still curled from the mugs, faint and warm. Patience, he whispered to himself, staring into the quiet. Always patience. Outside, the faint glow of Christmas lights flickered through the window pane, reflecting in his eyes like sparks waiting for wind. The wind howled outside like a living thing, rattling the window panes of Walter's study. The table in front of him was covered in papers, printouts from the courthouse, copies of deeds, and now something new, a bank statement he'd retrieved that morning. The logo in the corner, First Continental Mortgage Group, gleamed faintly in the firelight. Walter adjusted his glasses and read the line again, slow and steady, making sure he wasn't seeing it wrong. The house, his house, had been used to secure a second mortgage, a loan taken out by Daniel, signed, sealed, and buried under pages of financial jargon. The collateral? The very property Daniel thought he owned outright. Walter leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him. A humorless smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You greedy fool, he muttered. You used the house to feed the same hunger that's eating you alive. He reached for his notepad, flipping back to the page where he'd copied the reversion clause in neat handwriting. His finger stopped under one line, the same line that had made his pulse slow and his thoughts sharpened the night he found it. If the transferee violates residency terms or encumbers the property without written consent of the grantor, the deed shall revert to the grantor within 30 days of default. He read it again, and this time, the words tasted like power. A quiet knock came from the door. It's open, he said. Margaret stepped inside, her boots leaving damp marks on the entry rug. You're up early, she said, eyeing the pile of papers. That means either you couldn't sleep or you're up to something. Walter gave her a look that said both. Coffee's in the pot, he offered. She poured herself a mug and sat opposite him. So, she said, nodding to the papers, what's all this? Walter slid the top page toward her. That's the second mortgage Daniel took out 3 months ago, against the house. Her eyes widened. He mortgaged your home after taking it from you?
It
He
wasn't
nodded
just about
once,
the work.
calm
It
and
was about
unflinching.
the people we helped along
And
the
here's
way.
the beauty of it. He used it as collateral without my written consent, which means he just broke the clause. Margaret blinked.
When I look back
Wait,
at
that
everything we
means...
built, I realized
Walter finished her
it
thought,
wasn't just
his voice
about the
low
work.
and steady.
It was about the people
If
we
he
helped
defaults,
along the
the
way.
deed reverts. Automatically. She sat back, processing it. Then, slowly, a grin spread across her face. So, you're not taking it back, she said. He's losing it himself. Walter didn't return the smile. His eyes stayed on the document, tracing Daniel's signature. I just need to help gravity do its job. Margaret leaned forward, elbows on the table. You sure you're ready for that? Once this starts, there's no going back. Walter met her gaze. He took my home, Maggie. But I built this place with my hands. You don't own what you didn't bleed for. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right then, let's make sure he falls hard. When she left, Walter sat in silence for a long while, the weight of the decision settling like dust around him. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger was what Daniel expected. An explosion, a confrontation. But this wasn't rage. This was engineering. Measured, deliberate, unstoppable. He reached for the rotary phone on the side table, its cord coiled like a sleeping snake. He dialed the first number, the main line for First Continental. After a few rings, a voice answered, polite and detached. Good morning, First Continental Mortgage. How may I assist you? Yes, Walter said, his tone slow and composed. I'd like to speak to someone about the collateral verification process on account number 48372. Are you the borrower? No, Walter said. I'm the grantor, the original property owner. I believe your borrower may have encumbered the title unlawfully. The line went quiet. Then came the careful, professional tone of someone suddenly aware that a problem had just entered their system. Sir, I'll need to transfer you to our compliance department. Take your time, Walter said, leaning back. I've got patience to spare. He spent the next hour making quiet calls, one to the county recorder's office, another to a retired lawyer he'd once done cabinetry for. Each conversation ended the same way. Polite gratitude, faint confusion, and a single note of certainty in Walter's voice. By the time he hung up the last call, the snow outside had turned heavy again, swirling like a curtain across the yard. The house groaned under the wind. Walter stood, looking out the window. In the reflection, his face was calm, but hard. The face of a man who'd finally stopped looking for fairness and started building justice with his own hands. On the table, the papers lay neatly stacked, the clause highlighted, the loan documents copied. The foundation of his plan was set. Outside, a distant roll of thunder broke the silence, rare for winter, deep and foreboding. Walter didn't flinch. He simply watched the snow fall thicker, his eyes following. Yet the way a craftsman studies the first line of a blueprint, a storm was coming. He'd make sure of it. The argument started over breakfast, though Lily hadn't meant to cause one. She was just telling a story about how Grandpa had shown her how to sand wood smooth like glass. She smiled as she said it, but the reaction was instant. Natalie froze mid-stir, the spoon clinking hard against the coffee cup. You went to see him? Lily blinked, confused by her mother's tone. Just for a little while. He made cocoa. It was Lily. Natalie's voice cut like a knife. We've talked about this. You can't go sneaking off to that house. Daniel looked up from his tablet, already irritated. You did what? Lily's hands tightened around her cup. I missed him, Dad. You disobeyed us. His voice was sharp, loud enough to make her flinch. He's not well, sweetheart. You don't know what he's capable of. The words hung in the air, sour and heavy. He's not dangerous, Lily protested. He's sad, that's all. That's enough. Natalie's chair scraped back. You are not to go near him again. He's confused, Lily. He's unstable. Lily stared between them, trying to understand how kindness had turned into something forbidden. He's my grandpa. Daniel's voice softened just enough to sound like reason. And I'm your father. I'm asking you to trust me on this. She looked down, silent now, her throat tight. The conversation ended there, but something inside her had shifted. The kind of quiet hurt that doesn't scream, it just hardens.
It was about the people we helped
That
along
night,
the way.
Walter sat by the kitchen window, the house dim except for the orange glow of a single lamp. Snow pressed gently against the glass, whispering like an old secret. The phone on the counter rang once.
It
Short,
wasn't just about
hesitant.
the work. It was
He
about
picked it
the
up.
people we helped along
Hello?
the way.
A whisper came through the line. It's me. He smiled instantly. Lily. I can't talk long, she said, her voice small but certain. Mom and Dad would freak out if they knew.
It was about the people
You don't have to call, sweetheart. I want to, she said quickly. They said you're mad, but you're not. I know you're not. Walter's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything about the clause, the plan, the justice waiting in the fine print. But she didn't need that weight. I'm fine, he said gently. Just working on something. Are you mad at them? He paused, then smiled faintly. No, mad gets you nowhere. I'm just patient. Lily laughed softly. That's what you said last time. He could hear her smile through the phone, and for a brief, precious moment, he felt Evelyn in that laughter, the warmth, the light, the reminder that not everything he'd built was gone. You keep being kind, Lily, he said. That's how you stay stronger than all this noise. When she hung up, Walter stood for a long time by the window, listening to the dial tone. Every conversation with her was a spark against the cold. 2 days later, Margaret knocked on his door again, snow dusting her coat. She didn't waste time on greetings. I called in a favor, she said, brushing past him. An old friend of mine, lawyer, retired but sharp as ever. He'll meet us this afternoon. Walter nodded, coat already in hand. They drove through the slush to a brick building on the edge of town, the kind of office where nothing ever happened fast. The lawyer's nameplate was faded, Paul R. Jennings, SQ. Jennings was in his 70s, sharp-eyed, with the slow, confident voice of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading fine print. Walter handed him the folder of documents without a word. Jennings adjusted his glasses, flipping through each page carefully. The only sound was the slow ticking of the wall clock. After several minutes, he leaned back in his chair and gave a low whistle. Well, he said, you've got him right where it hurts. Walter's expression didn't change. The clause holds. Jennings nodded. Solid as they come. The moment that mortgage defaults, ownership reverts to you. You can't sell, transfer, or refinance without your written consent. It's airtight. Margaret smiled, satisfied. So, all he needs is proof of misuse? Jennings nodded again. That and timing. Let the bank handle the rest. The law is already written in your favor. Walter sat quietly for a moment, then reached out and closed the folder. I already have the proof. Jennings raised an eyebrow. Then it's only a matter of when. Walter stood, his movement slow but sure. Then it's time, he said quietly. Margaret caught his eye, the same silent question she'd asked before. Are you sure you're ready for this? He didn't answer with words, just the look, steady, resolved, and colder than the snow waiting outside. When they stepped out into the fading light, the sky was a flat gray, the air heavy with the promise of another storm. Margaret tucked her scarf tighter. You know what you're doing, Walt. I've known since the day he sold my house, he said. I just needed to see it on paper. As they walked toward the truck, the first flakes began to fall again, slow and deliberate. The quiet start of something that would not stop once it began. The new year was waiting just beyond the frost. On the final night of December, Daniel Hayes' house blazed with light and laughter. Cars lined the street, engines humming in the cold, their headlights cutting through the snow like ribbons of gold. Music pulsed faintly through the windows, the kind of upbeat jazz that sounded expensive and empty. Inside, everything gleamed. The table was set for more than a dozen guests, champagne chilling in silver buckets, laughter spilling from every corner. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, glass in hand, his smile wide and practiced. He looked like the man he'd always wanted to be, admired, envied, applauded. To a new chapter, he said, raising his glass high, to smart decisions and new beginnings. There were cheers, clinks of glass, the chorus of voices eager to agree. "You've really done it this time," said one guest, a man in a tailored suit. "Selling that old place. Brilliant move. Market's peaking." Daniel grinned, pride swelling in his chest. It was time. You have to know when to let go of the past. Natalie stood beside him, dazzling in sequins, the perfect hostess. "He's too modest," she said sweetly. "Daniel handled everything himself. The listing, the negotiations. He even managed to get over asking price." Another guest whistled in admiration. "Wish I had your business instincts, Hayes." Daniel laughed, but there was something hollow in it, a thin echo that didn't quite reach his eyes. For a brief moment, his gaze drifted toward the window, out into the dark beyond the glass. A flicker of movement caught his eye, but when he looked again, there was nothing, just snow falling softly against the night. Outside, unseen, Walter Hayes stood in the shadow of an oak tree, his coat dusted white. The cold didn't bother him. He'd stood in harsher winters. This one just happened to be personal. From his vantage point, he could see everything. The warmth of the lights, the laughter that filled the house, the sun he no longer recognized. He told himself he came only to make sure it was true, that Daniel was selling his house. But really, he'd come to witness the moment before the fall. Inside, Daniel moved toward the kitchen, where the realtor, Karen Lyle, waited with a briefcase and a clipboard. "I brought the paperwork," she said cheerfully, tapping the folder. "All we need is your signature, and the buyer's transfer goes into effect Monday morning." Daniel took the pen with a flourish. "Finally," he said. "Feels good to close this chapter." He scrawled his name at the bottom of the page, then flipped the packet closed without a second thought. Karen frowned slightly. "You know, I thought there was supposed to be one more signature here. Something about a co-grantor." Daniel waved it off. "Oh, that's old boilerplate from the deed transfer. My dad's not involved anymore. It's mine now, legally." She hesitated, but Daniel's confidence was smooth, unbreakable. "If you say so," she said, slipping the papers back into her case. The guests gathered again in the dining room, counting down to midnight, champagne glasses raised. Daniel's laughter filled the room once more, proud, untroubled, unaware. But outside, Walter was already walking away. He didn't need to hear the countdown. He didn't need to see the confetti burst or the clock strike 12. The real moment had already come and gone. The moment his son had signed a contract that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Because that missing signature, his own, made the deal worthless. He paused halfway down the snowy sidewalk, glancing back once at the house. The windows glowed golden in the distance, a beacon of arrogance standing against the cold. Somewhere inside, his son was celebrating a victory that didn't exist. Walter's breath came out slow, deliberate, curling in the night air. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice in the wind, that quiet steadiness she used when the world felt unkind. "Measure twice, cut once." He smiled faintly. "Already did," he murmured. Snow fell heavier now, muffling the world in white. The sound of fireworks began to echo faintly from downtown, distant bursts of color lighting the horizon. Walter didn't turn to watch. His steps were steady, leaving deep prints behind him as he walked toward the truck. Behind him, laughter rose one last time from the house. Loud, careless, oblivious. Walter opened the driver's door and sat for a moment in silence, the engine ticking as it warmed. On the passenger seat beside him lay the folder of copies, the clause highlighted in yellow. "Without written consent of the grantor, the deed shall revert." He touched the page gently, like a craftsman checking his final cut. Then he closed it, eyes narrowing toward the road ahead. "The tables always turn," he said softly, the words fogging the windshield. And as he drove off into the deepening snow, the music from the house faded behind him, replaced by the steady hum of the truck, carrying him toward the reckoning that was already in motion.
It wasn't
The phone
just
sat
about
on the
work.
kitchen
It
table
was
like a
about the
quiet
people
weapon.
we helped along
Walter
the way.
stared at it for a long time, his thumb resting on the first digit of the number written neatly in his notebook. The compliance office of First Continental Bank,
When I look back
the same
at everything
bank
we
Daniel
built,
had
I
used to mortgage
realized
the house.
It wasn't just
The fire
about
in the
work.
hearth
It
had
was
burned
about
down
the
to
people
embers,
we helped
flickering in
along the
low
way.
rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. Outside, the morning snow was still falling, thin and quiet. It was the kind of morning Evelyn would have called honest weather, clear enough for truth to find its way through.
It wasn't just about
Walter
the work.
lifted the
It was
receiver
about
and
the
dialed.
people we helped
His pulse
along
was
the
steady.
way.
After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. First Continental Mortgage Division. This is Melissa speaking. How can I help you today? Good morning, Walter said, his tone calm, professional. I'd like to report a potential violation regarding one of your property loans. The woman's voice straightened immediately. May I ask who's calling? An interested party, he replied. I prefer to remain anonymous.
It wasn't just
Sir,
about
we
the work.
usually
It
need...
was about the
He
people
cut her
we
off,
helped
not
along the
unkindly.
way.
You'll want to hear this. A borrower named Daniel Hayes filed a mortgage under account number 48372. He used a property as collateral that he does not legally own. The title was transferred under a conditional clause, which he's already broken. Silence on the other end, followed by cautious typing. Do you have documentation to support that claim? I do, Walter said. And if you pull the deed yourself, you'll see there's a reversion condition tied to the property, meaning your collateral isn't valid. It reverts to another name, mine. The woman hesitated, the sound of clicking keys filling the pause. I see the account, she said finally. I'll have to escalate this to our compliance officer. Do that, Walter said simply. And you might also look into whether the borrower's insurance matches ownership records. It doesn't. He hung up before she could ask more. The sound of the receiver clicking back into place echoed through the room. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to breathe. The air felt lighter now, charged with quiet purpose. He turned toward the window. Snowflakes drifted down, indifferent but constant, the world moving exactly as it should.
It wasn't just about
3 days later, at the Hayes household, the calm broke. Daniel was in his home office when the email came through. He read the subject line twice before opening it. Notice of loan review and temporary account suspension. His stomach dropped. What the hell? Natalie walked in, still in her robe, coffee in hand. What's wrong? He scanned the message again, his voice rising. They're saying there's a discrepancy in the collateral documents. They're freezing the account until ownership verification is complete. Natalie frowned. That's impossible. You own the house, Daniel. We have the deed. Daniel shook his head, scrolling frantically. They're reviewing the original transfer. Someone must have tipped them off. Who would? She stopped herself, realization dawning like a cold shadow. Your father. Daniel slammed the laptop shut. No, he wouldn't. But even as he said it, the certainty was gone. Natalie's voice sharpened. You said he signed everything willingly. He did, Daniel snapped. He just didn't understand what he was signing. Oh, brilliant, she shot back. So you built this entire mess on a lie that can be undone by a phone call. He rubbed his temples, pacing the floor. It's a misunderstanding. I'll call the bank, clear it up. From the hallway, Lily stood quietly, clutching her book to her chest. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried easily. Her mother's anger, her father's panic, all of it painted a picture she didn't need explained. Grandpa, she thought. She remembered the last phone call they'd shared. His calm voice, the patience in it. I'm just working on something, he'd said. Now she understood what that meant. Lily turned away before they could see her smile. It wasn't joy exactly. It was pride, quiet and small, like the flicker of a candle finally lit. By the end of the week, the notice from the bank turned official. The mortgage was under audit. Payments frozen pending verification. The same house Daniel had flaunted as his crown jewel was now a question mark in the bank's system. Walter read the public filing from his desk, a single page printed from the county's online record. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He just folded the paper neatly and set it on top of his growing file. The phone rang once. Margaret. Well, she asked. He smiled faintly. The storm's rolling in.
When I look back at everything
You
we
sound
built,
too
I
calm for a
realized
man watching his enemy
it wasn't
drown.
just about the work. It was about
I built
the
him,
people we helped
Walter said
along
quietly.
the way.
I know how long it takes for the cracks to show. Through the window, the first real wind of the coming blizzard began to howl. He sipped his coffee, watching it move across the field, the kind of wind that made roofs creak and old trees groan. Justice, he thought, doesn't arrive loud. It arrives exactly when it's ready. The first sign of collapse came quietly, not through shouts or slammed doors, but through the dull sound of a declined transaction. Daniel Hayes stood at the counter of an upscale restaurant, card in hand, the waiter waiting politely, but firmly. "I'm sorry, sir," the young man said, lowering his voice. "It's been declined." Daniel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Run it again." The waiter did. Same result. When Daniel stepped outside, the winter air bit harder than usual. He dialed his bank immediately, pacing on the icy sidewalk. After 2 automated menus and 5 minutes on hold, a clipped voice answered. "Mr. Hayes, this is regarding your mortgage accounts?" "Yes. Why are my cards being declined?" A pause. "Due to an ongoing documentation review, all associated accounts have been temporarily restricted. Loan payments are currently pending verification." "What does that mean?" "It means," the voice said carefully, "you cannot make withdrawals or payments until the review is complete." Daniel's pulse quickened. "That's my money." "I understand, sir. The issue involves the collateral documentation. It's a matter of ownership verification." The words hit harder than the wind. Ownership verification. By the time he got home, Natalie was waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You want to tell me why our accounts are frozen?" Daniel dropped his coat onto the floor. "It's a temporary hold. The bank's being cautious." "Cautious?" she snapped. "The credit card was declined at the club. Do you know how that looks? They said the mortgage documents didn't match the title." He didn't answer. Natalie stepped closer, voice rising. "You said everything was clean. You said that house was ours." Daniel rubbed his temples. "It is ours." "Then why are we broke in our own home?" The silence between them stretched until it cracked. Then, with sudden fury, she snatched her phone off the counter and began dialing. Daniel's head snapped up. "Who are you calling?" "Your father," she hissed. "He's behind this. Who else could it be?" The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. Walter's voice came through, calm and unhurried. "Evening, Natalie." "Don't evening me," she spat. "What did you do? Did you call the bank? Did you tell them something to mess with our accounts?" Walter let the silence linger a moment, just long enough to let her own words echo back. "I didn't mess with anything," he said finally. "I just told the truth." "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "You've ruined everything. Daniel's under review. Our accounts are frozen and..." Walter interrupted softly. "You should sit down for dinner together tonight." "What?" "Sit down," he repeated, "while you still have that dining room." Before she could respond, the line went dead. At his house, Walter set the receiver back into its cradle. The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean, like a room freshly aired out. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and took it to the window, watching the snow drift lazily under the porch light. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt balanced. For years, he'd lived by the rule that every beam must bear its weight, every wall its share of pressure. Now, finally, that same principle was finding its way back into his life. The revenge wasn't spite anymore. It was symmetry. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice in the rustle of wind outside. "Don't let bitterness build your house, Walt." He took a slow sip, letting the burn settle. "It's not bitterness, Evie," he murmured. "It's justice. There's a difference." The door creaked, open behind him. Margaret stepped in, brushing snow off her coat. "I saw your lights. Heard about the bank trouble." Walter didn't turn. News travels fast. "You really did it, huh?" "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "I just stopped pretending I couldn't."
It
She
wasn't
walked
just
closer,
about the
studying
work.
him.
It was about the
Be
people we
careful,
helped
Walt.
along the way.
Revenge has a way of feeling righteous, right up until it costs you something worth keeping. He looked at her reflection in the window, her eyes sharp but kind.
When I look back
What's
at
left
everything
for it
we
to cost
built, I
me?
realize
Your
it wasn't
peace,
just about the
she said
work.
softly.
It was about the
That's
people
the first thing it always takes. Walter didn't respond. The snow outside thickened, swirling like ghosts under the streetlight. He turned back toward the fire, the glass still warm in his hand. I'll risk it, he said finally. Margaret sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. Then at least don't lose your soul while you're winning. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily between them, the sound of time, of reckoning, of a man caught between justice and mercy.
It wasn't just about the
Walter
work.
stared into the flames, his face lit gold and shadow. I'll stop when the balance is even, he said, not before. Outside, the storm kept gathering. The letter came on a Monday morning. Thick envelope, bold black stamp, notice of foreclosure pending. It looked too official to ignore, too heavy to belong to an ordinary mistake. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter in his robe, coffee gone cold in his hand. The more he read, the less he understood. He turned the page over again and again, as if another version might appear. Due to collateral discrepancies and ownership conflict, repayment failure constitutes immediate foreclosure proceedings. He read the line aloud, his voice cracking halfway through. Ownership conflict? Natalie appeared in the doorway, still in her silk robe, hair tousled. What is it now? Daniel handed her the letter, his hand trembling slightly. She skimmed it, her face hardening. This has to be a mistake. I've already made the payments, Daniel said, pacing. They bounced because of the freeze. I told them I'd clear it up. Call them, she demanded. He already was. But after 3 rings, the only thing that answered was a recorded voice and a transfer tone. 10 minutes on hold. 15. Finally, a woman picked up. Mr. Hayes? Yes, your file's under review. There's a legal hold pending verification of ownership. Daniel's frustration broke through his polished tone. What verification? I own that house. A pause. According to the property record, that's under dispute. Dispute with who? Another pause. Then softly, Walter Hayes. He froze. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. That's my father, he said, as if explaining it would fix the reality. I'm sorry, sir. You'll need to resolve it with the county. Until then, foreclosure proceedings will continue. The line went dead before he could argue. Natalie's voice trembled with fury. You said everything was legal, Daniel. You swore this was clean. He grabbed his coat. I'll fix it. I'll go down there myself. Fix it? You can't even pay for gas if your accounts are frozen. But Daniel was already out the door, the sound of it slamming echoing through the house. The county office smelled like paper and winter. Daniel pushed through the doors, face red from the cold, and something deeper. The receptionist looked up as he approached, trying to find his breath. I'm here about a property dispute, he said quickly. Maple Drive. My name's Daniel Hayes. Before she could respond, a voice spoke from behind him. Calm, steady, unmistakable. You don't have to explain. I'm already here. Daniel turned. Walter. He was sitting quietly on a bench by the wall, coat buttoned, folder resting on his lap. He looked almost peaceful, like a man waiting for a train he knew would arrive exactly on time. Dad? Daniel's voice was thin, uncertain. What are you doing here? Walter stood slowly, his movements measured. Watching this play out, same as you. This is insane, Daniel said. The bank's saying you're disputing the title. That can't be right. Walter nodded toward the clerk's desk. You might want to hear it from them before you call it insane. Daniel blinked, confused. What does that mean?
It wasn't just about the work. It was
Walter
about the
opened his
people
folder.
we helped along the way.
Inside were neatly stacked copies of every document. The deed, the loan agreements, the signed mortgage, and at the bottom, a highlighted paragraph. Unauthorized collateralization triggers automatic reversion to the grantor.
It wasn't just
He held
about
them
the
out.
work. It was about
You
the
remember
people
signing
we
these?
helped along the way.
Daniel looked down, his name staring back at him again and again in blue ink. Walter's voice was low, even. You made your home a business, son. Now it's closing. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Walter stepped closer, close enough for his words to land, but not wound. You thought the rules didn't apply to you, that you could take what you didn't understand and bend it until it broke. But business has rules, Daniel, and this one's simple. You break the foundation, the house falls. He placed the folder gently into Daniel's trembling hands. Consider this the invoice. Then he turned, coat brushing lightly against his son's arm as he walked past. He didn't look back. The door swung open, letting in a rush of winter air before closing with a dull thud. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the papers. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. The clerk, unsure what to say, looked down and pretended to shuffle forms. Somewhere outside, Walter's boots crunched through the snow, steady, deliberate, each step sounding like punctuation at the end of a long, quiet sentence. Inside, Daniel finally sank into the chair behind him. The folder lay, open in his lap, the truth glaring back up at him. For the first time, he understood that silence could be louder than fury, and his father's silence had just spoken volumes. The house that had once pulsed with holiday laughter now sat in brittle silence. Boxes were half-packed in the corner of the living room, unopened, unplanned, a mess of panic and pride. The foreclosure notice lay on the coffee table, its words heavy enough to silence everything else. Natalie stood by the window, staring out at the snow that refused to stop falling. Her reflection in the glass looked more like a ghost than a wife. Behind her, Daniel sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The last 2 days had broken him in ways no argument ever had. You said it was handled, Natalie said quietly, her voice trembling not from fear but fury contained too long. You said everything was under control. Daniel didn't look up. I thought it was. Thought, she repeated, turning toward him. You gambled our future on thinking. I didn't gamble, he said weakly. I was securing what was ours. Ours. Her laugh was sharp and hollow. You built this whole empire of yours on lies, Daniel, on your father's back, on his home. He lifted his head then, eyes red, exhausted. It was my home, too. It was, she said coldly, until you turned it into collateral. The words hit him harder than she intended, but she didn't stop. Do you understand what you've done? We're losing everything. The house, the accounts, the respect people had for you. You destroyed it with your pride. Daniel rubbed his face, voice cracking. I was trying to protect us, Nat. I was trying to make sure we never had to struggle like my parents did. Natalie's shoulders stiffened. Struggle? You mean like the man who built your house by hand while you were out there pretending success is something you inherit? Don't do that, he said. Don't make him a saint. He left me nothing. He left you everything, she shouted, the sound echoing through the house. A name that meant honesty, a foundation you could have built on, but you sold it for a handshake and a bank loan. Daniel stood abruptly, the old anger rising again, but this time it collapsed before it could grow. His voice cracked mid-yell, breaking into something smaller. I didn't mean for this to happen. Natalie stared at him, the first tear sliding down her cheek. But it did. He looked at her helplessly. You think I don't know that? Then do something, she whispered. Fix it. How? He asked, almost pleading. Tell me how I fixed losing everything. She turned away from him, her arms crossed tight, eyes unfocused on the glass. Maybe you can't. A pause. Maybe I can't stay to watch you try. The words hung between them, like the last thread holding a breaking rope. At the top of the stairs, Lily stood quietly, clutching the railing. She'd been there long enough to hear too much. Her father's voice, small and defeated, Her mother's words, sharp and final. Her heart ached, not just for them, but for the space between them that had swallowed everything good. She backed away slowly, slipping into her room. On her desk, she pulled out a sheet of paper, her hand trembling slightly as she began to write. Grandpa, I still love them, but I love truth more. She folded the note, sealing it in an envelope with careful precision, as if doing so might keep it safe from the chaos around her.
We helped along the way.
The next morning, Walter found the envelope in his mailbox. Her handwriting was small and neat, the kind Evelyn used to call gentle ink. He read the note twice, then a third time, his eyes softening. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, but not from weakness, from the quiet pulse of purpose. Margaret arrived minutes later, carrying a thermos of coffee and a look that could see through anything. She spotted the letter in his hand and the faint smile on his face. What's that? He handed it to her. She read the single line and exhaled through her nose. She's sharp, that one. She sees clearer than both her parents, Walter said. Margaret looked up at him. You realize she's the only one learning from this mess? Walter nodded slowly. Good. Someone should. Margaret tilted her head. You ever stop to think maybe that's what you're doing? Teaching him a lesson? He folded the letter carefully, sliding it into his breast pocket. I'm not teaching him, he said quietly. I'm reminding him. Of what? He met her gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. Of what it costs to forget who built your foundation. They stood there in silence for a while, the snow falling steadily outside. Walter's eyes drifted to the horizon, where the storm clouds were finally beginning to break. But beneath that calm sky, something was still moving, inevitable, unstoppable. The kind of reckoning that doesn't announce itself until it's too close to turn away. The courthouse hall smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, the sterile scent of bureaucratic endings. Rows of chairs faced a low wooden dais, where an auctioneer arranged his papers, his voice rehearsing figures under his breath. Outside, a thin drizzle tapped against the windows, soft but relentless. Daniel sat near the front, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white. His tie was crooked, his eyes hollow from too many sleepless nights. Natalie sat beside him, stone-faced, arms crossed, radiating quiet fury. She hadn't said a word since they'd parked the car. In the row behind them, a few curious locals whispered, drawn by the spectacle of a once respected man losing everything. Daniel could hear their murmurs, but they sounded distant, underwater. He kept his gaze locked on the podium. They can't do this, he whispered. It's not over yet. Natalie didn't answer. She just looked at him, disappointment sharp as glass. You said that a month ago, she said quietly. He turned toward her, desperation bleeding through his voice. I'll talk to them. I'll explain. It's a misunderstanding. But as the auctioneer cleared his throat and called the room to order, Daniel's words died in his throat. Lot number 74, the man began, his tone impersonal and precise. One single-family residence located at 42 Maple Drive, two-story, four-bedroom with attached workshop, opening bid $80,000. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's jaw clenched. That's my house, he muttered. The auctioneer continued, unbothered. Property sold as is, pending foreclosure settlement. Daniel shot to his feet. That's wrong. There's been a mistake. The ownership. The clerk beside the podium raised a hand. Sir, if you're contesting, you need to submit. I already did, Daniel snapped. I'm the owner. The clerk's eyes flicked to the paperwork in front of him, then back up. According to the court, ownership reverted pending clause enforcement. You're not listed. Natalie's breath caught. Oh my God. The auctioneer, indifferent to the unfolding collapse, tapped his gavel lightly. Do I have an opening bid? The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper, broken and small. Please, don't sell my house. Then, from the back of the room, a calm voice spoke. 80,000. Heads turned. Walter Hayes stepped forward, coat buttoned neatly, hat in hand. His movements were measured, quiet, composed. He didn't look at Daniel. He didn't need to. The auctioneer nodded. 80,000 from the gentleman in the back. Do I have 90? Another bidder, a man in a gray suit, raised his card. 90. Walter lifted his hand again. 100. The room had gone utterly still. Do I have 110? The auctioneer asked. The man in gray hesitated, then shook his head. The numbers climbed, slow but sure. 105, 110, 115. Until it came back to Walter, who didn't flinch. 120, he said evenly. The auctioneer scanned the room. No movement. 120,000 going once. Daniel half rose from his seat. You can't do this. Walter's gaze flicked to him for the first time. Not cruel, not triumphant, just steady. The gavel hit the block. Sold, the auctioneer said, voice echoing in the chamber. To Mr. Walter Hayes. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Even Natalie's composure cracked. She turned toward Walter with something between disbelief and awe. Daniel stood frozen, his lips parted but no sound coming out. He looked from the podium to the papers, to the man who had once built the walls that sheltered his childhood. The gavel sound lingered in his ears long after it stopped. Walter approached the clerk, signing the necessary forms with a steady hand. No hesitation, no celebration, just completion. When it was done, he turned, hat still in hand, and walked past his son. Daniel reached out, not to grab, but to speak, yet no words came. Walter stopped beside him, just long enough to say quietly, "You made your house a business, Daniel, and every business answers to its debts." Then he walked toward the exit, the soft sound of his boots against the marble floor, the only thing left in the room. The rain outside had turned to sleet, tapping against the glass like slow applause. Inside, Daniel slumped back into his chair, staring at the floor, the auctioneer's next words distant and meaningless. Natalie looked away, folding her arms, a single tear tracing her cheek before she wiped it away quickly, pride refusing pity. In the back of the room, a reporter's camera clicked once, capturing the moment, the builder reclaiming his house, and the son who had lost it all. Walter stepped out into the cold, rain sliding off his hat brim. He exhaled once, slow and steady. It wasn't victory he felt, it was balance, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because the world had finally tilted back into place. But as he walked away down the courthouse steps, the sky rumbled low, thunder rolling like an unfinished sentence. The story wasn't over, not yet. The key turned in the lock with a slow, deliberate click, the same sound it had made for half a lifetime. Walter stood at the threshold, hand still resting on the knob, unable to step forward just yet. The air that drifted out was faintly sweet with varnish and dust, carrying the scent of a place that had slept but never forgotten. He crossed the doorway like a man entering a memory. The wooden floors groaned softly beneath his boots, the kind of sound that only old homes make. A familiar voice greeting him in creaks and whispers. The sunlight poured through the same front windows he and Evelyn had once washed together every spring. It fell in golden stripes across the furniture, highlighting the details only a craftsman would notice. The joinery, the polished rails, the rhythm of the grain. Every corner bore his fingerprint. Every nail still sat where his hammer had left it. Walter reached out and brushed his hand against the wall, the paint smooth and cool under his fingertips. "You're safe again," he murmured. His voice trembled slightly, not from age, from release. The weight that had pressed on his chest since Christmas finally shifted. The sound of light footsteps came from behind him. "Grandpa?" He turned. Lily stood in the doorway, her breath fogging in the cold, eyes wide with wonder. She looked from him to the open living room, her lips parting, as though she was afraid to speak too loudly and disturb the moment. "It's ours again?" she asked. He nodded, smiling softly. "Home's not a thing you own, sweetheart. It's a thing you keep." She crossed the room in two quick steps and threw her arms around him. He held her tightly, the top of her head fitting perfectly under his chin, just like it had when she was small. She was crying, not the loud, broken kind of tears, but quiet ones that carried both joy and sorrow. Walter stroked her hair. Hey now, he said gently, no more crying. We've done enough of that for a lifetime. Margaret's voice floated from the doorway. You'll make her cry more if you keep talking like that.
It wasn't just about
She stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold, a bundle of firewood in her arms. This place looks just like you left it, she said, except colder. Walter smiled. That we can fix. She set the wood down by the hearth and knelt to light the fire. The old bricks crackled to life as the flames caught, licking upward, warm and bright. For the first time in years, the house glowed the way it used to, alive from the inside. Walter sank into his armchair, the one that had waited patiently in the corner all this time. The fabric was faded, the cushion worn, but it felt like coming home to his own heartbeat. Margaret straightened, brushing ash from her hands. Well, she said, looking around, looks like Justice came home too. Walter didn't answer right away. He just stared into the fire, its reflection dancing in his eyes. Justice, maybe, he said finally. But peace, that one's still finding its way. Lily sat cross-legged by the hearth, watching the flames. Do you think Dad knows you're back here? She asked quietly. Walter's expression softened. He'll know soon enough. Some truths don't need to be told. They just wait until the light hits them. The fire popped loudly, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Margaret handed him a cup of coffee she brewed in the old percolator she found in the kitchen. He accepted it with a small nod, taking in the scent of home, the mingled smells of wood smoke, old varnish, and faint sweetness of cocoa still on Lily's breath. The clock on the mantel began to chime softly, the same clock he'd made decades ago, its hands still turning with quiet faith. He leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the fire seep into his bones. The house no longer felt like a possession. It felt like an old friend, breathing again after a long sleep. Margaret sat across from him, studying his face. So, what now? She asked. Walter didn't look away from the fire. Now, he said, we start the hard part. She raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Healing, he replied. Outside, the wind eased, the snow settling into a soft hush. But inside, beneath the flicker of firelight and the steady tick of the clock, something deeper stirred. The quiet promise that even when vengeance is done, the heart still has work left to do. The silence in the rental house was different, not peaceful, not comforting, just hollow. The kind of quiet that feels earned by failure. Boxes sat unopened against the walls, each one labeled with a life they'd lost: dining room, office, master bedroom. But none of those places existed anymore. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, face lit by the pale glow of the screen. The job listings blurred together. Sales manager, property consultant, regional rep. He clicked and scrolled, sent resumes into the void, and got nothing back. Each, we regret to inform you. Email landed like another nail in a coffin he built himself. Natalie moved around him like a ghost. She barely spoke. The echo of her heels on the tile was sharper than her voice, and somehow colder. Once, she had admired his confidence, his drive. Now she looked at him and saw the collapse that came after it. You'll find something, she said flatly, pouring herself a drink at noon. Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at another rejection. They won't touch me, he muttered. Word got around. About what? He hesitated, jaw tightening. About the house. About Dad. Natalie exhaled through her nose. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you made him your enemy. He looked up at her then, tired, hollow, angry, but mostly ashamed. I didn't make him my enemy, he said. He made himself my competition. She laughed, bitter and sharp. He built your house, Daniel. You just lost it. He turned away. You think I don't know that? She didn't respond. She just walked out, leaving her glass half full on the counter. The sound of the door closing was soft, but final.
When I look back at everything
Across
we built,
town,
I realized
warmth lived
it wasn't
inside
just
another
about
set of
the work,
walls.
it was about the
Walter and
people
Lily
we
stood
helped
side
along
by
the way.
side in what used to be her nursery. The room smelled of fresh paint and old wood, the scent of renewal. Walter dipped his roller into the tray, the color of soft cream that glowed faintly in the morning light.
It wasn't just about the work.
Careful on
it
the
was about
edges,
the
he
people
said.
we helped
That's
along
where
the
people
way.
notice the most. Lily smiled, her hair tied back with one of Margaret's old scarves. It's weird painting over it, she said. All those little pencil marks you made when I was little. The height chart, remember? He glanced at the faint lines still visible beneath the first coat. I remember every inch. Should we paint over them? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, but only after we take a picture. She grinned.
It wasn't
Mom
just
would
about
call
the
this
work.
sentimental.
It was about the people we
Your
helped
mom,
along the way.
Walter said with a smirk, calls anything sentimental that doesn't have a price tag. She laughed, but there was sadness behind it. The roller moved up and down, smooth strokes, rhythmic. They worked in silence for a while, comfortable, quiet silence, not the kind Daniel lived in now. As the first coat began to dry, Walter stepped back and studied the wall. You see, he said, voice low, some walls deserve a second coat.
It wasn't just about
Lily
the
turned
work.
to him
It was
curious.
about the people we
Because
helped
they're
along
old?
the way.
Because they've held too much, he said. A second coat doesn't erase what's underneath. It just gives it another chance to look new again. Lily smiled faintly. Like people.
It wasn't just about the
He didn't
work.
reply,
It was about the
but she
people
caught the
we
way his
helped
eyes
along the
softened.
way.
When the last stroke was done, they stood back and admired their work. The walls gleamed, bright and clean, but the faint shapes beneath them, the memories, the scars, were still there if you knew where to look.
It was about the people we helped along the way.
Later that evening, Walter sat by the fireplace, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Margaret was across from him, knitting something small and blue.
It
Feels different in here, she said.
It
Alive
wasn't just
again.
about the work.
Walter
it was
nodded
about
slowly.
The people we helped
Lily
along
helps.
the way.
She's good for you, Margaret said. Keeps you from turning into stone. He smiled at that, but his gaze drifted toward the window, where snow fell thick against the glass. I keep thinking about Daniel, he said quietly, about what happens next. Margaret set her knitting down. You've done enough, Walt. Let life handle the rest. He looked at the fire, steady, controlled, alive, but not wild. That's just it, he murmured. This wasn't about destroying him. It was about reminding him what fire feels like when you let it die. Outside, the wind howled, carrying faint echoes through the trees. The ghost of laughter, the sound of footsteps that no longer belonged to the same house. And somewhere across town, in a rental that smelled of lost time, Daniel Hayes sat in the dark, staring at the empty space where pride used to live. While in another home, his father and daughter painted walls brighter than before, proof that sometimes rebuilding starts in silence. It was past midnight when the knock came, soft at first, almost hesitant. Walter looked up from the small workbench in his study, the ticking clock marking the silence between knocks. He wasn't expecting anyone. The fire had burned low, painting the room in the quiet orange glow of solitude. He stood slowly, the old floor creaking beneath his steps, and opened the door. There, shivering under the porch light, stood Daniel. His coat was soaked through, his face pale and drawn. He looked smaller than Walter remembered, not in stature, but in spirit. Dad, Daniel said, his voice hoarse. Walter's jaw tightened, but his tone remained even. You shouldn't be here this late. I know, Daniel said quickly, but I couldn't wait anymore. The air between them hung heavy with things unsaid. Walter stepped aside. Come in before you freeze. Daniel hesitated, then entered. The warmth of the house hit him like memory. The faint smell of pine, the fire crackling somewhere deep inside. He looked around, eyes catching on every corner, every detail he'd once taken for granted.
The people we helped along
"You
the
fixed the
way.
place up," he murmured. Walter closed the door. It didn't need fixing, just care. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Daniel's eyes flickered, guilt cutting through the exhaustion on his face. They moved into the living room. Walter gestured toward the chair by the fire. Daniel didn't sit right away. He stood by the mantel, staring at the clock that Walter had built years ago. The same clock he'd tried to sell along with the house. "It still works," Daniel said. "Some things are built to last," Walter replied. Silence again. Only the faint crackle of the fire filled the gap between them. Then Daniel spoke, his voice breaking on the edges.
It wasn't just
"I
about
thought
the
I was
work.
protecting
It
the
was about
family,"
the people
he said,
we helped along
"when I
the
transferred the deed, when I took control of everything. I told myself it was the smart thing to do, that I was making sure we were secure, that you wouldn't have to worry."
When I look back at everything we
Walter
built,
studied
I
him,
realize
the tremor in his hands, the hollow in his eyes.
People we helped along
"And
the
who
way.
told you I needed protecting?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Nobody. I thought you were getting old, that you'd mess something up, or that someone would take advantage of you." He looked down.
It wasn't just about
Turns
the
out,
work. It
I was the
about
one who did.
People we helped along
The words
way.
came out barely above a whisper, but in the quiet room, they hit like thunder. Walter's eyes softened just slightly. "Control isn't care, son." Daniel froze. The sentence hung in the air, plain and simple. Unpolished truth delivered without anger. It was the kind of line that didn't shout to be heard. It simply stayed. Daniel blinked hard, his jaw trembling. "I know," he said. "I see that now. Every time I look at what I lost." He turned away, gripping the edge of the mantel, his voice raw. "I was stupid, Dad, arrogant. I wanted to prove I could handle everything. The money, the house, the family. I thought if I made it mine, I could make it perfect."
It wasn't
His
just
shoulders
about the
shook
work.
once,
It was about
a sound
the people we
escaping him,
helped along
half
the way.
breath, half sob. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for what I said, for what I took." Walter stayed quiet for a long moment. The fire cracked and shifted, throwing light across the lines of his face. "I'm not sure sorry's enough," he said finally. Daniel nodded, tears streaking down his face. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it." Walter walked closer, his voice quieter now, measured. "You'll earn your place back, not your house." Daniel lifted his eyes, searching his father's face. What he saw there wasn't mercy, but something better, a doorway not yet closed. "I can live with that," he said. Walter gave a slow nod. "Then start by showing up for the people who still believe in you." Daniel looked toward the window, where snow drifted past the glass. "Lily," he said softly. Walter didn't reply, but the faintest flicker of approval crossed his face. Daniel turned for the door. When he opened it, cold air swept in, sharp, clean, honest. He paused, looking back once more. "Thank you for letting me in." Walter stared into the fire. "Just remember why you were knocking." The door closed behind him, leaving Walter alone again. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was waiting. The morning light fell cold and clean across the backyard. Snow from the night before lay untouched except for two sets of footprints. One old, one newer. Walter stood beside the half-broken fence that bordered the property, its boards leaning, nails rusted through with time and neglect. He wore his old work gloves, the leather cracked at the seams, and a wool cap pulled low against the chill. The smell of pine, earth, and distant wood smoke filled the quiet air. The crunch of footsteps came from behind him. Walter didn't turn. "You're late," he said. Daniel's voice answered, low, uncertain. "Didn't think you'd notice." "I notice everything on this property," Walter replied. "Grab that post-hole digger." Daniel hesitated, then did as he was told. His movements were stiff, careful, the awkward grace of a man relearning something he'd forgotten how to do. For a while, they worked in silence. The sound of metal biting into frozen soil replaced conversation. Each strike of the shovel, each clank of the hammer became a language of its own, one that required no forgiveness, only rhythm. Walter measured the distance between posts, marking each spot with a precision born from decades of repetition. Keep that line straight, he said quietly. A crooked fence never lasts a winter. Daniel nodded, his breath visible in the cold air. He drove the next stake deeper, hands trembling slightly from the effort. Lily watched from the porch, wrapped in her grandfather's old flannel jacket, her cheeks pink from the cold. She smiled faintly every time their movements fell in sync. It wasn't harmony yet, but it was the closest they'd come in years. Inside the house, Margaret poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the window frame. She watched them through the glass, her eyes narrowing in quiet approval. Well, I'll be damned, she muttered. Miracles do show up in work boots. Outside, Daniel dropped another nail into place and wiped his forehead. You ever gonna tell me if I'm doing it right? Walter hammered a board into place. If it stands, you did it right. A small smile tugged at Daniel's lips. That's it? No lectures? Walter paused, leaning on his hammer. You don't learn much from words, Daniel. Never did. The wind picked up, scattering loose snow into the air. It swirled around them like faint ghosts of old winters. Years of distance, arguments, and unspoken things carried away in white silence. From the porch, Lily stepped down and approached with a thermos in her hands. Hot chocolate, she announced, offering them each a cup. Mom said she's not coming. She's still mad. Daniel's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Yeah, I figured. Walter's voice came out measured, not unkind. Pride takes longer to thaw than snow. Lily looked at both men, then back at the fence. Will it be done by spring? Walter smiled faintly. If we keep at it. And if we don't, she teased. He looked at Daniel before answering. Then it'll stay half finished, like most things left waiting for someone else to fix. They worked again after that, slower but steadier. Walter guided, Daniel followed. Every nail that sank, every plank that straightened, seemed to hammer something unseen back into place. By late afternoon, the fence stretched clean and strong across the yard, each board catching the low winter light. Daniel stood back, breathing hard, gloves caked with dirt and snow. For the first time in months, he looked at his father without defensiveness. It's solid, he said quietly. Walter ran his hand along the top rail, testing its sturdiness. It'll hold. From behind them, Margaret's voice broke the stillness. Sometimes punishment builds stronger men than praise. Daniel turned, startled. She stood in the doorway, coat buttoned, watching them with the knowing look of someone who'd seen the full circle complete itself. Walter didn't answer her. He just nodded once, slow, firm, eyes still on the fence. The sun dipped behind the trees, leaving streaks of gold across the snow. The two men stood side by side, their shadows long, their silence no longer heavy but earned. As the wind softened, a single board creaked, settling into its new place, and for the first time in years, it stayed. The world outside was wrapped in snow again, soft, steady, endless. Walter sat by the window of his living room, the same one that had once been stripped of everything but memory. Now, it glowed warm with light and life, fire in the hearth, garland along the mantel, Lily's laughter echoing faintly from the kitchen where she was baking. He reached for his reading glasses, sorting through the small stack of Christmas mail on the table. Most were cards from neighbors and old friends, kind, polite, predictable. But one envelope stood out. No return address. Handwritten, the way people used to write when words still meant something. The handwriting was careful, familiar. Walter's heart slowed. He turned it over once, then opened it. A simple card, snowflakes embossed in silver, no fancy greeting inside, just a line written in blue ink. Dinner's ready. Your seat's at the table. Daniel. For a long moment, Walter just stared at it. His thumb brushed over the ink, tracing the words. The message was small, but its weight was enormous, heavier than all the silence that had filled the year before it. From the kitchen, Lily peeked around the corner. Grandpa, you okay? He folded the card, carefully, sliding it into his pocket. I think, he said quietly, I've got somewhere to be tonight.
It wasn't just about the work. It was
Snow
about the
crunched
people
under
we
his
helped
boots
along
as
the
he made
way.
his way up the familiar walkway. The lights along Daniel's front porch glowed warm against the winter dusk, flickering through the falling flakes. For a moment, Walter stood at the gate, hand on the latch, just breathing it in. It had been exactly a year since the dinner that broke everything apart. Same week, same cold, same ache. But tonight, the ache felt different, not sharp anymore, just tender. He knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Lily's face lit up first, her eyes bright with excitement. "You came," he smiled, the kind of smile that starts slow and deepens with truth. Would have been rude not to. She grabbed his arm, pulling him inside. The warmth hit instantly, the smell of roast turkey, cinnamon, and pine filling the air. The table was already set, silverware polished, candles lit, laughter barely restrained. And there, right beside Lily's chair, was an empty seat. On the plate in front of it sat a small wooden clock, the one he'd carved years ago, the one he'd carried home untouched that awful Christmas night. It was ticking again, soft and steady. Walter stopped, his throat tightening.
It wasn't just
"You
about
kept
the
it,"
work.
he
It was
whispered.
about the people we helped
Lily
along
nodded
the
proudly.
way.
It's the heart of the table now. He looked toward Daniel, who stood at the far end of the room, hands folded nervously. For the first time in years, his son didn't look like a man performing. There was no arrogance in his posture, no defense in his tone. Just humility, quiet, earned. "Glad you came, Dad," Daniel said. Walter met his eyes. "You set a place for me." Daniel smiled faintly. "Didn't feel right without you." The room went quiet for a moment, but it wasn't the uneasy kind of silence they'd known before. It was full, heavy with understanding, light with forgiveness. They sat, Lily between them, beaming, filling every small pause with stories from school and jokes she'd heard from Margaret, who promised to stop by later. Dinner passed slowly, gently. Each word felt deliberate, each glance an unspoken truce. The clinking of silverware and the soft hum of Christmas carols on the radio filled the spaces where anger once lived. When the plates were nearly empty, Daniel rose to his feet, holding his glass. His voice was low, but steady. "To family," he began, then paused. His gaze moved from his daughter to his father, and to those who build and rebuild. Walter felt the words hit him square in the chest. They weren't poetic, but they were true, and that made them beautiful. He nodded once, unable to speak, his eyes glistening under the firelight. The wooden clock on the table chimed softly, as if agreeing. Lily clapped her hands. "To rebuilding," she said brightly, raising her own glass of cocoa. Laughter followed, gentle, real, cleansing. As the night deepened and snow thickened outside, Walter found himself watching his family, not with pride, but with peace. The kind that only comes after everything has been broken and somehow still stands. He caught Daniel looking at him across the table, their eyes meeting for a brief, wordless exchange. Not father and son, not judge and defendant, just two men who finally understood what it cost to love and to lose. Walter reached over, winding the clock once with a small twist of the key. Its ticking filled the quiet like a heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't hurt. The night after the Christmas dinner, snow began to fall again, slow, quiet, deliberate. The kind that didn't announce itself but simply arrived, layering the world in soft forgiveness. Across the street, Margaret Price stood on her porch with a wool shawl draped over her shoulders, a steaming mug in her hands. From where she stood, she could see through Walter's living room window. The glow inside was warm, the kind of light that only comes from peace finally earned. Through the glass, Daniel and Lily were laughing over something small, maybe a story, maybe an old joke, their faces unguarded, human again. And there was Walter, sitting in his armchair, a faint smile on his lips, eyes half on them, half somewhere far away. Margaret took a slow sip of her tea, the steam fogging her glasses.
It
took you
wasn't
long
just
enough,
about
old
the
man,
work. It
she
was about
murmured
the
under her
people
breath,
we helped
a
along
smile
the way.
tugging at the corner of her mouth. It was strange, she thought, how full circle life could be, how a year of cruelty and coldness could end with laughter, echoing through a window that once held only silence.
It wasn't just about the work. It was
She'd
about
watched
the
him
people
crumble,
we helped along
rage,
the way.
rebuild, and now, finally, rest. And even though she'd never say it aloud, she worried more than once that the revenge might eat him alive before redemption could find him.
It wasn't just about
Now,
the work.
watching
It
the
was
light
about
dance across the
people we
snow,
helped along
she
the
knew it
way.
hadn't. He'd stopped at the edge, just before the bitterness set in for good. Later that evening, the sound of boots on her porch pulled her from her thoughts. She turned as Walter stepped into the light, hat in hand, a dusting of snow clinging to his coat. "You should be inside," she said. "You're not 20 anymore, you know." He smiled faintly. "Neither are you." Margaret huffed, trying not to grin. "I age better."
It wasn't just about the
"Can't
work.
argue
It was
that,"
about the
he said,
people we
stepping
helped
closer.
along the way.
"Just wanted to thank you, Margaret." "For what?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "For being the one voice that didn't give up on me, when everyone else thought I was losing my mind." She chuckled
It
softly.
wasn't just about the work.
"You were
It was
losing your
about the
mind.
people we
You just
helped
happened to
along
build
the
something
way.
better out of the pieces." He looked down, shaking his head with that quiet humility she'd always admired. "You kept me steady when I wanted to burn it all down." She leaned against the porch, railing. "You didn't need me for that. You just needed to remember who you were before all this mess. The man who built his house with his own hands. The one who believed in hard work, not payback." Walter's voice dropped low, almost reverent.
It wasn't just about
"You
the
know,
work.
when
It
I was
about
walking
the
home that
people
night,
we helped
the
along
night
the
Daniel
way.
told me to sit in the kitchen, I kept hearing your words in my head. Builders always know how to rebuild. I didn't know it'd take me this long to understand what you meant." Margaret turned toward him, her expression softening. "You didn't just take your house back, Walt," she said. "You took your dignity back." He met her eyes, his breath visible in the cold. "That's all I ever wanted." They stood there for a moment, saying nothing. The world around them was still, the snow thickening, falling in the slow, lazy spirals. The wind carried faint sounds from the haze home. Lily's laughter, Daniel humming an old Christmas tune he hadn't touched in years. Margaret smiled at the sound. "He's coming around, your boy." Walter nodded slowly. "He's got the hard part ahead, forgiving himself." "You think he can?" He glanced back at the window across the street, where the golden light spilled into the snow. "I think he's learning," Walter said. "The trick isn't forgetting what you broke. It's knowing how to hold it right when you get another chance." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "You sound tired," she said finally. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." She frowned a little. "You okay?" He looked up at the sky, the flakes landing soft on his hat brim, his eyes reflecting the porch light. "Yeah," he said, "just thinking how quiet it feels this year, how still." Margaret didn't miss the weight in his voice. There was peace in it, yes, but also something else. Something that sounded like farewell whispered between breaths. She placed a hand on his arm. "Don't you go turning poetic on me. You've still got more fixing to do." He chuckled. "Maybe one more thing." They stood together a while longer, side by side, watching the snow fall between their two houses, once divided, now connected again by something stronger than ownership or pride. When Walter finally turned to leave, Margaret called after him, voice softer than usual. "Hey, Walt?" He paused at the end of her steps. "Yeah?" She smiled gently. "You did good." He nodded once. "I know." As he crossed back toward his home, the flakes grew heavier, wrapping everything in a hush. Margaret watched him until the door closed behind him, the warm glow inside swallowing his shadow. The snow fell steady. The circle, at last, felt complete. And yet,
wasn't just about the
in the
work,
silence
it
that
was about
followed,
the people we
she couldn't
helped
shake
along
the feeling
way.
that something final was drawing near. The snow had stopped falling by morning, leaving the world wrapped in a stillness that only winter can bring. Walter sat by his window with a mug of black coffee cooling beside him, the early sunlight cutting through the frost on the glass. The house was quiet, his kind of quiet, filled with the echoes of all the work he'd done to make it whole again. He looked down at the folder resting on the table. Inside it were the final papers, the deed, the title, the official stamps that marked ownership. He'd been staring at them for an hour, not because he doubted what he was about to do, but because he wanted to feel the weight of it, one last time. When the clock struck 9, he stood, buttoned his coat, and slipped the folder under his arm. The walk to town was short but slow. His knees ached with every step, but he didn't mind. He'd built this life one nail at a time. A little pain was just part of the work. The law office was small, tucked between a bakery and a used bookstore. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Behind the desk sat Harold Morton, his attorney of 20 years, a round man with kind eyes and a mind sharp as a chisel. "Morning, Walt," Harold said with a grin. "I was starting to think you changed your mind." Walter shook his head and took a seat. "No, Harold, just needed to be sure I was ready." "You're certain about this?" Harold asked, sliding the papers toward him. "Once you sign, it's done. No going back."
It wasn't just
Walter
about
nodded.
the work. It was about the
That's the
people we
point.
helped along the way.
He pulled the pen from his pocket, its cap worn smooth from years of use. His hand didn't tremble, not once. The tip met the paper, and he wrote his name in slow, deliberate strokes, the same way he used to carve wood, steady and with purpose. When he was done, Harold checked the signature and smiled faintly. "So it's official. The property now belongs to Miss Lily Hayes." Walter leaned back in his chair, exhaling softly. The sound carried something between relief and release. "She's young," Harold said. "Might not understand what this means yet." "She will," Walter replied. "She's got more sense than her father did at twice her age." Harold chuckled. "You could have just left it to Daniel. Most men would." Walter's eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. "That's exactly why I didn't. I'm not passing down lumber and nails, Harold. I'm passing down a lesson." Harold nodded, leaning forward. "And what lesson's that?" Walter's voice was quiet, almost tender. "Let her inherit honesty, not greed." The lawyer regarded him for a long moment, then smiled, genuine, touched. "You're a rare man, Mr. Hayes. Most people spend their lives trying to own things. You just made sure what you built will outlive you." Walter smiled faintly. "That's the plan." He stood, pulling his coat tighter around him. The wind outside howled low, like a song from somewhere distant. "Make sure she gets the letter," he said before leaving. "It's in the envelope on top." "I will," Harold said. "And Walt, for what it's worth, your Evelyn would be proud." Walter paused at the door, eyes glinting with that quiet, weathered warmth. She always did like good craftsmanship. Then he stepped out into the cold. That evening, Lily came home to find the envelope on the kitchen table, her name written in her grandfather's steady hand. She opened it carefully, the paper crisp and deliberate, like every word he ever spoke. Inside was the deed to the house, and beneath it, a short, handwritten note. "For you, Lily, so you'll never forget what real ownership means. It's not the roof or the walls. It's the people under them. Don't let walls matter more than hearts." Her hands trembled as she read it. The ink had smudged slightly at the edges, his handwriting already fading into memory. Tears welled in her eyes as she pressed the letter to her chest. Outside, Walter was sitting by the fire, unaware that she'd already found it. The flames danced in his reflection, the clock ticking softly in the next room. He didn't need to see her reaction to know. He could feel it, like warmth spreading through the old bones of the house, a quiet promise that what he'd built would keep standing long after he was gone. For the first time in a long time, he closed his eyes and let the sound of the fire carry him somewhere peaceful. The house creaked gently, settling in the wind, as if sighing with him. Winter came early that year, sharp and silent, the kind that made the air taste like metal and turned every breath into a cloud. The snow never seemed to melt, not even on the days when the sun tried its best to break through. Inside the old Hayes home, the fire burned steady, but Walter was fading. It had started as a cough, dry, persistent. Then came the fatigue, the shortness of breath, the way his hands trembled when he tried to hold his coffee. At first, he'd brushed it off, muttering about just the season, but the truth had a way of making itself known. By the time Daniel insisted on bringing him to the doctor, the verdict was clear. His heart was failing, slow but certain. Walter accepted it the way he'd accepted every challenge life had thrown his way, with quiet grace and no complaint. But Daniel and Lily refused to do the same. Now, the man who once built houses with his hands spent his days resting in the one he'd saved, propped up in the armchair by the window, wrapped in the same wool blanket Evelyn had knitted decades earlier. Daniel stood by his side, pouring tea into a chipped mug. "You should be in bed, Dad," he said gently. Walter smiled faintly. "If I wanted to die staring at a ceiling, I'd have built a smaller house." Lily chuckled softly from the other side of the room, tucking another log into the fire. "Grandpa, that's morbid." "It's honest," Walter replied, his voice rasping but sure. "Honesty's the only thing that still keeps me warm." The three of them fell into a comfortable silence. Outside, snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, layering the fence they'd rebuilt together. White on wood, old on new. Daniel sat across from him, hands clasped, his face drawn, but peaceful. "You know, I think about it all the time," he said quietly. "Everything I did, how I almost lost it all." Walter looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't almost lose it, son. You did. And then you found it again, the hard way." Daniel's throat tightened. "You forgave me before I earned it." "No," Walter said softly. "I forgave you because you were still trying to earn it." Lily came over then, kneeling beside Walter's chair. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "You should rest, Grandpa. Doctor said not to tire yourself out." Walter reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I'm not tired," he said, though his breath was thin. "I'm just full, that's all." Daniel rose and adjusted the blanket around him, careful and deliberate, the way a son tends to something fragile he's afraid to break. "You've done enough, Dad. You don't have to worry about us anymore." Walter's eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the world looked exactly as it had the night his revenge began. The snow falling, the light flickering against it. But this time, it didn't feel cold. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to think family was about who owned what. The house, the land, the name." He paused, struggling for breath. Lily squeezed his hand gently, her small fingers gripping his larger, weathered ones. "But I was wrong," he said. "Family isn't about who owns the house." His gaze turned toward the fire, steady, glowing, alive. "It's about who keeps it warm." Lily's tears broke free then, quiet and clean. She nodded through them. "We'll keep it warm, Grandpa. Always." He smiled faintly, the same soft smile he used to give Evelyn when she'd catch him staring across the dinner table. "Good," he whispered. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, steady and rhythmic, the sound that had marked every chapter of his life. Each tick felt slower now, like time itself was bowing its head. Daniel knelt beside his daughter, one hand on her shoulder, the other reaching for his father's. Walter's breathing grew shallow, but his expression stayed calm, peaceful even. The snow outside thickened, swirling around the windows, muffling the world to silence. The firelight danced across his face, flickering between shadow and gold. And then, with one last slow exhale, Walter Hayes let go. No gasp, no struggle, just a man finishing his work. The clock ticked once more, glowing faintly in the firelight, its hands still turning, its rhythm unbroken. Lily buried her face in Daniel's shoulder. He held her tightly, tears tracing silent lines down his cheeks. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to rebuild."
It wasn't
The
just
fire
about the
popped
work.
softly,
It was about the
sparks
people we
lifting into
helped
the air
along
like
the
quiet
way.
prayers.
Outside,
Outside, the snow fell heavier, not cruelly, but gently, blanketing the world in peace. A life completed,
everything we
not
built,
wasted.
I realized it
The house
wasn't just
was
about the
unbearably
work.
still,
It was about the
not the
people
peaceful
we
kind of
helped
stillness
along the
Walter had
way.
loved, but the hollow kind that follows an ending. The fire had burned out hours ago, leaving behind only the faint scent of smoke and ash. The wooden clock on the mantel ticked softly, its steady rhythm filling the silence he'd left behind. Lily moved through the house in careful steps, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a calmness in her movements now, the quiet purpose of someone searching for connection, not answers.
It was about the people
In
we
Walter's
helped
study,
along the
the
way.
desk sat exactly as he'd left it, papers neatly stacked, his favorite pen resting beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. A mug of cold tea still sat near the edge, the rim stained faintly from his last
wasn't
sip.
just about the work. It was
Lily
about
reached
the
for the
people
top
we
drawer and
helped along
hesitated
the
before
way.
pulling it open. Inside was an envelope, sealed but marked in his familiar handwriting. For Lily, when the house feels too quiet.
When I look back at everything we
Her throat
built, I
tightened.
realized
She sat
it
down,
wasn't just
unfolding
about
the note
work.
with trembling
It was about
fingers.
the people we
His
helped
handwriting
along
filled the
way.
page, deliberate, strong, the way he used to carve words into wood when he wanted them to last. My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means I've taken my last walk through the snow. Don't be sad too long. I've had my share of winters, and everyone was worth it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, the paper shaking between her fingers. You made me proud, not by being perfect, but by being brave. Brave enough to love when it hurt, brave enough to forgive when others wouldn't. The house is yours now, but don't ever let it own you. Let it be a place where hearts heal, not where they hide. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she read the final lines. If you ever wonder what kind of man your grandfather was, just look around. Every nail, every board, every choice, they're all the proof you'll need. And if you ever wonder what kind of woman you are, remember this. You were the warmth that kept this house alive. Her sobs were quiet, restrained, but heavy. The kind of grief that sits deep in the chest and refuses to move. She folded the letter against her heart, holding it there as if it could fill the space he'd left behind. The door creaked softly behind her. Daniel stood there, framed in the light from the hallway. His face looked older, worn down not by years, but by guilt. He cleared his throat, voice low. I heard you in here. Lily didn't look up. I found his letter. He nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the desk, the familiar smell of sawdust and varnish still lingering in the air. He always wrote when he couldn't say things out loud. She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. He forgave you, Dad. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't know if I deserve that. Lily looked up at him then, her eyes red but steady. You don't have to deserve it. You just have to live like you do. He exhaled shakily, nodding. Then I'll earn that forgiveness every day. He stepped closer, his hand brushing the top of the desk where Walter's pen still rested. You know, he said softly. He used to tell me this room wasn't about work. It was about remembering why you worked in the first place. Lily folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. Then we'll remember together. They moved to the window, standing side by side. Outside, snow was falling again, slow, gentle, endless. The rebuilt fence stood strong against the white, the same way Walter had taught them to build, straight, steady, with care. Lily slipped her hand into her father's. Daniel hesitated only a moment before squeezing it firmly. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of forgiveness, of memory, of the man who had built both. As the clock in the next room ticked softly on, they stood together by the window, watching the snow fall on the house that now belonged to all of them. And for the first time since Walter's passing, peace didn't just feel possible, it felt tangible. Spring returned slowly, thawing the last traces of winter from Maple Drive. The snow had melted into soft puddles along the old fence, revealing patches of green grass pushing up through the soil, quiet signs that life no matter how bruised, always found its way back. The Hayes house stood proudly again, its wood newly sanded, its paint fresh and warm against the afternoon sun. The shutters had been replaced, the porch repaired, the garden replanted. Yet it wasn't just a home anymore. It was something more. Lily stood on the front steps, holding a pair of scissors tied with a red ribbon. Around her, neighbors filled the yard, faces old and new, people who'd known Walter as the man who built things that lasted. The mayor was there, local reporters, kids from the nearby high school. Even the sound of hammers from distant projects seemed to pause, as if the town itself were listening. Daniel stood beside her, his hands tucked into his pockets. He wore a simple shirt and work jeans. Nothing like the polished suits of the man he used to be. His eyes carried the weight of memory, but also something lighter, something earned. Margaret pushed her way gently to the front, cane tapping against the porch. "Don't make me stand here all day, sweetheart," she said, her tone teasing, but her smile proud. Lily laughed softly. "You ready, Miss Price?" "I've been ready since the day your grandpa picked up his hammer," she said. "Now cut that ribbon before I freeze." The crowd chuckled. Cameras clicked. Lily lifted the scissors, her fingers trembling, slightly. "This isn't just a building," she said, her voice steady but full. "It's a story. One my grandfather started long before any of us understood what he was really building." She paused, glancing back toward the front door. Through the glass, she could see the wooden clock on the wall, still ticking, still keeping time. "He believed in work that mattered," she continued, "in teaching, by doing. So today, we're reopening his house as something new, a community workshop where anyone can learn what he taught us, how to build with your hands and lead with your heart." The scissors closed with a clean snip. The ribbon fluttered to the ground as applause rose through the air, echoing against the porch, the fence, the walls that had once held so much silence. Margaret leaned close to Daniel, her voice soft enough that only he could hear. "He'd be proud of you both, you know." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I just wish he could see it." "Oh, he can," she said with a faint smirk. "He built it too well not to." Inside, sunlight poured through the windows, falling across rows of new workbenches and neatly arranged tools. The smell of fresh wood and varnish mixed with something older, the scent of history, of effort, of love. Kids wandered the space in awe, touching the tools like relics. On one wall hung a plaque with Walter's name engraved beneath a simple inscription, "For those who build not just with their hands, but with their hearts." At noon, the wooden clock on the mantel began to chime. Its sound filled the room, steady, clear, alive. Conversations hushed as the final note lingered in the air. Lily stood beside it, her fingers brushing the polished frame. "This house built us more than we built it," she said softly. Daniel, standing behind her, nodded through tears. "It saved us too." The crowd fell silent again, but it wasn't grief anymore. It was reverence, the kind that grows only when people realize they've witnessed something come full circle. Margaret wiped a tear with her gloved hand, muttering, "Damn dust in the air." The laughter that followed was soft, genuine, healing. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sawdust and spring. The house, once a symbol of betrayal and pride, now stood as a testament to second chances. As people began to leave, Daniel lingered on the porch, looking back through the doorway. The light inside seemed to shimmer, almost as if the air itself remembered him and forgave him. He closed his eyes, hearing his father's voice one last time in memory. Builders always know how to rebuild. And for the first time, Daniel understood that redemption doesn't erase the past. It rebuilds it, one nail, one choice, one act of love at a time. The Hayes home glowed again, just as it had so many winters before. Strings of soft lights framing the windows, garland draped across the mantel, the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey drifting through the air. Laughter filled the halls, echoing against the wood that had once heard only silence. It was Christmas again, a full year since Walter's passing. But this time, the house didn't feel like a place of ghosts. It felt alive, rebuilt not just in walls and beams, but in spirit. Lily moved through the dining room, checking the table settings one last time. Every plate was in place, every glass filled, every napkin folded neatly. Yet, in the middle of the long oak table, one chair sat empty, its cushion untouched, its back polished smooth. In front of it, a single white candle waited to be lit. She stood before it for a moment, the noise of conversation fading into background warmth. With a match, she struck a small flame, shielding it with her hand as it caught. The wick flickered, then steadied, its light reflecting off the silverware and glasses. "This one's for you, Grandpa," she whispered. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. He'd aged a little, not in years, but in the quiet way people do when they finally make peace with their past. He smiled faintly. He'd have said the seat should go to whoever earned it. Lily turned to him, smiling through the shimmer in her eyes. Then it's still his. He nodded, walking over to pull out a chair beside her. "You're right." The rest of the family gathered, filling the table with movement and sound. Margaret was there too, Kane resting against her chair, wearing the same red scarf Walter had once teased her about. Even Natalie had come, her expression softer than it had been in years. As they began to eat, the talk flowed easily. Lily told a story about one of the teenagers from the carpentry workshop, how he built a bookshelf from scratch, how proud he'd been to show her. The table erupted in warm applause and laughter. Then Daniel set down his fork, his eyes distant for a moment. "You know," he said, "Dad used to tell me that wood remembers." Margaret tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "That if you mistreat it," Daniel said, "it bends, it splinters. But if you work with it, really listen to it, it holds. Forever." There was a pause, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. He went on, voice gentler now. "I didn't understand that for most of my life. I thought strength came from control. Turns out it comes from care." Natalie looked down at her plate. For the first time, her voice came out low and sincere. "He was a better man than I gave him credit for." Daniel looked at her, surprised but grateful. She lifted her gaze, meeting his. "I didn't see it before. How much of this," she gestured around the room, "wasn't just built by his hands, but by his heart." Lily reached across the table, placing her hand on her mother's. "He'd be glad you're here." Natalie smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I think I needed to be." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, delicate, painting the world white through the large front window. The fire crackled in the background, its warmth seeping into the wood and the people sitting around it. Daniel raised his glass, his hand steady, his voice firm but full. "To Walter Hayes," he said, "to the man who taught us that you can lose everything and still come home." Glasses clinked softly. The candle beside the empty chair flickered once, its flame dancing as if in agreement. For a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. The kind of silence that comes only when love finally outweighs regret. Margaret exhaled softly. "He'd have liked this," she murmured. Lily smiled. "He built it for this." Through the window, the snow kept falling, blanketing the fence, the trees, the porch. A white peace settling over the house. Inside, the candle burned steady beside the empty chair, its flame small but unyielding. A symbol not of absence, but of presence. Proof that warmth can outlast the man who made it. Morning sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, stretching across the wooden floors like memory itself. Dust particles shimmered in the light, rising and falling with each quiet breath of the old house. The fire in the hearth was long gone, replaced by the warmth of the day. Lily moved slowly through the living room, her fingertips trailing across the furniture. The same chairs, the same table, the same hand-sanded beams that had once carried her grandfather's heartbeat. The house had changed, yet somehow it hadn't. Every board still whispered his presence. Every nail still held his story.
When I look back at everything we
She
built,
paused
I
near the
realized
mantel,
it
where the
wasn't
clock,
just about the work.
that old,
It was about
faithful
the
clock,
people we helped
ticked
along
in
the
its
way.
unhurried rhythm. Its sound filled the silence, gentle and steady, the pulse of a home that had survived everything. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Still warm."
It wasn't just
The
about
words
the
weren't
work.
for
It was
anyone in the
about
room,
people we
but the
helped
house
along
seemed to
the
hear them
way.
anyway. A faint breeze drifted through the open window, rustling the curtains like a quiet acknowledgement. Her gaze lifted to the photo that now sat centered on the mantel. It was new, taken that Christmas. Daniel, Lily, Natalie, and Margaret standing in front of the house, snow falling lightly around them. And at the center of the frame, just above their heads, hung the wooden clock. Its pendulum had caught the light in that shot, a golden blur, as if Walter himself had found a way to stay in the picture. The camera in Lily's hand clicked softly as she adjusted the frame. She smiled. Perfect. From the doorway, Daniel watched her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His face said everything. The humility, the gratitude, the understanding of what his father had really left behind. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done good with it, Lily." He'd be proud. She turned to him, eyes reflecting both joy and loss. It's not just his anymore, it's everyone's. Daniel nodded, running his hand along the wooden frame of the doorway, feeling the smooth grain beneath his palm. "Feels different now, because you see it," Lily said softly.
It wasn't just
the way
about
he
the
did.
work. It was about the
He
people
smiled,
we helped along
small,
the way.
bittersweet. Took me long enough. They stood together for a moment, neither breaking the silence. Outside, the faint sound of carolers drifted through the street, children's voices, pure and light, echoing against the crisp winter air. Daniel took a step back, letting his daughter linger in the light. She reached out and straightened a tool on the workbench near the window, one her grandfather had used. The touch was gentle, reverent, a small act of care, the kind he would have appreciated. As she moved toward the doorway, she glanced back one last time at the room, the mantel, the clock, the chair that would always stay empty but never feel lonely. The sunlight shifted, catching the face of the clock. Its hands glinted gold for a brief second, and in that stillness, it almost felt like time itself paused to listen. Then, faintly, not in the air, but in the memory between moments, Walter's voice returned. "Never let anyone tell you where you belong. Build your seat, and the house will follow." The sound was calm, grounded, steady, not haunting, not sad, just truth echoing through wood and years and blood. Lily smiled, tears threatening but not falling. "I hear you, Grandpa," she whispered. Daniel looked up, eyes wet but peaceful. The carols outside swelled softly, silent night playing faintly from somewhere down the street. The camera panned across the living room, the photo on the mantel, the glowing clock, the flicker of sunlight across the grain of the wood. Then to the house itself, standing strong beneath the clear winter sky, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Snow began to fall again, slow and quiet, blanketing the roof, the fence, the path to the door. Inside, the clock ticked on, a steady heartbeat in a world that kept moving. And as the music faded, the screen dimmed to black. A home rebuilt, a family restored, a life completed, but never gone.